This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still get a chill down my spine when I think about that house. My husband Mark and I bought it back in 2011, thinking we'd found our perfect retirement dream. We'd spent years talking about a place on the water, somewhere peaceful, where we could watch the sunset with a glass of wine. The Cedar Lake house on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain in Vermont seemed absolutely perfect. Panoramic windows overlooking this secluded area called Blackwater Cove. Beautiful deck, private dock jutting out into the water. The price seemed too good to be true, way below market value for lakefront property. When we asked why, the real estate agent got this weird look on her face and just said the previous owners moved on quickly. Actually, there had been 3 different owners in 5 years. Mark and I just looked at each other and smiled. We're both pretty practical people. I was an accountant and he was an engineer before retirement. And we figured we were getting a steal because of other people's superstitions or inability to maintain a lake house. God, I wish we'd asked more questions. The first few weeks were absolute bliss. It was early summer, and we'd spend our mornings having coffee on the deck, afternoons kayaking or reading, and evenings watching the sun set over the mountains across the lake. I remember thinking I'd never been so happy or at peace. Then August came, and with it the thunderstorms. We get pretty dramatic storms up in that part of Vermont, the kind where the sky turns this weird greenish purple and the wind whips the water into whitecaps. I've always loved watching storms, so that evening when one rolled in, I made myself a cup of tea and settled into the window seat in our living room that faced the lake. The rain was coming down in sheets, and lightning was flashing every few seconds. That's when I saw it, a figure standing motionless at the end of our dock, just standing there in the pouring rain, not moving. I couldn't make out much detail through the downpour, but it looked like someone in dark, completely soaked clothing. Not very tall, maybe a teenager. They were just staring at our house. I called for Mark, but by the time he came over, whoever it was had disappeared. Mark thought I was seeing things, a shadow or a piece of debris blown onto the dock. But I know what I saw. Someone was out there, watching our house during a violent thunderstorm. The next morning we called Sheriff Hargrove. He was this older guy, born and raised in the area, with this perpetually tired look in his eyes. When we explained what happened, he didn't seem surprised at all, just nodded and looked out at the cove. Blackwater gets its name honestly, he said, squinting at the water. Deeper water than it looks, unusual currents too. That was it. No offer to increase patrols, no suggestion to file a report, just that cryptic comment about the water. Mark and I decided to install security cameras, 5 of them covering all approaches to the house, including the dock. For a few weeks, everything was quiet. The cameras showed nothing unusual, just deer, raccoons, the occasional fox. We started to relax again. Maybe I had seen something that night, maybe not. Either way, we felt safer with the cameras. Then came September 17th. I remember the date because it was our anniversary. We'd gone into Burlington for dinner and a show, got home around midnight, and went straight to bed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. Not sure why, no noise or anything, just that feeling of something being wrong. I checked the security app on my phone and saw that all 5 exterior cameras had lost power, every single one of them at exactly 2:15 a.m. I woke Mark up and we checked the circuit breakers, but nothing was tripped. The rest of the house had power, Just the cameras were out. We decided to wait until morning to figure it out, but neither of us slept well after that. When the sun came up, the cameras suddenly came, back online, all showing a timestamp of 4:30 a.m. Mark went outside to check them and found something that made my blood run cold. Small, wet footprints leading from the dock up to our bedroom's sliding glass door, like a child had walked up from the lake and stood outside our room while we slept. I've never seen Mark look scared before, but he was that morning. He's always been the rational one, the problem solver, but he just stood there staring at those small footprints until they dried up and disappeared in the morning sun. That's when I started researching the property's history. The local historical society was helpful, and I found out that our land had been undeveloped until 2006, when some guy named Richard Mercer built the house. He sold it just 8 months later to the Landry family, who lasted about a year before selling to the Thompsons, who we bought it from. The Thompsons had only stayed for 3 years. I dug deeper and found a local news blog that mentioned the Landrys. They had an 8-year-old daughter who had developed an imaginary friend while living at the house, a soaking wet boy who she said visited her window at night, begging to be let in. The Landrys moved away shortly after that. My search led me to something even more disturbing. In 1998, there had been a boating accident in Blackwater Cove. A local man named Timothy Whelan and his 9-year-old son Andrew had capsized during a sudden storm. Timothy's body was recovered the next day, but despite extensive searches, they never found Andrew. The article included a quote from one of the rescue divers that made my skin crawl. Apparently, before Timothy died, he'd been barely conscious when they pulled him from the water, but he kept muttering the same thing over and over. He won't let go. At the bottom, he won't let go. I showed everything to Mark. For the first time, I could see doubt in his eyes. He suggested we upgrade our security system and add floodlights. I wanted to sell and leave, but we'd sunk most of our savings into the place. We agreed to give it another month. The next few weeks were tense, but quiet. The cameras worked fine, showing nothing unusual. The floodlights illuminated the property at the slightest movement. We started to think maybe things would be okay. Then came the night that changed everything. We were both sleeping when I was jerked awake by a sound I'll never forget. The slow, deliberate scratching at our bedroom window, like small fingernails dragging across the glass. And something else, the soft patter of water dripping. Mark woke up too. We lay there frozen, listening to that awful scratching. Then Mark slowly reached for his phone and pulled up the security camera feed. The camera pointed at our bedroom window showed nothing there, nothing at all. But the scratching continued. Then, through the security system's audio, we heard it. A child's voice, so faint I thought I was imagining it at first. "He's here with me now." That was it. We grabbed our emergency bag, our phones, and the car keys, and left. Didn't even change out of our pajamas. We drove straight to a motel 20 miles away and didn't look back. The next day, Mark went back with Sheriff Hargrove to check the house. Everything looked normal. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. The sheriff clearly thought we were overreacting, but he was polite enough not to say it outright. Mark remembered we'd left a voice recorder running on the kitchen counter, part of our upgraded security measures. He grabbed it before leaving. When we listened to that recording later in our motel room, I knew we could never go back. After we fled, the recorder captured about an hour of silence. Then, clear as day, a child's voice. "When are they coming back? I'm cold." And then an adult male voice responding, "Soon. I told you they always come back." We put the house on the market the next day, disclosing everything that had happened. It took Nearly a year to sell, and we took a massive financial hit, but I didn't care. I would have given it away just to be rid of it. Before we left Vermont for good, I did some more digging. Turns out there had been hydrological studies done of Blackwater Cove over the years. It reaches unusual depths very close to shore, over 200 feet deep, just 50 yards out from our dock. And it has these impossible current patterns that create what one report called a perpetual underwater holding pattern. Things that sink there don't get carried away. They stay. We live in Arizona now, far from any large bodies of water. Sometimes Mark tries to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was all an elaborate prank. Maybe we imagined things. But I know what I heard on that recording. Whatever happened to Andrew Whelan in 1998, I don't believe he's alone down there anymore. And I don't believe he, or whatever keeps him company, wants to be alone. I still have nightmares about those small, wet footprints leading to our door. And sometimes when it rains hard, I swear I can hear fingernails scratching at the window and a child's voice whispering, "Let me in. I'm so cold." Story 2. I've been putting off writing this for years, but I guess it's finally time to get it all out. Maybe it'll help me process what happened on that mountain back in February of 2009. It's been 14 years, and I still wake up in cold sweats when the wind howls outside my window. I'm Daniel Harris. I was 32 back then and considered myself an experienced mountaineer. I'd summited most of the major peaks in the Cascades, done winter climbs in the Rockies, even led a few expeditions myself. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on Glacier Peak. Our team was solid, 7 of us, all with extensive mountaineering experience. Emma Lawson was our navigation specialist, always methodical, with her route planning. Chris Park handled most of our technical gear and was probably the strongest climber among us. Sam Chen was our medic. Thank God we had her. Then there were the Taylor brothers, Rob and Will, who'd been climbing together since they were teenagers, and Marcus Jensen, who'd just returned from an expedition in the Himalayas. I was the trip leader, responsible for coordinating everything. We'd been planning this winter ascent for months. Glacier Peak isn't technically the most difficult climb in the Cascades, but in winter conditions, it's a whole different beast. We'd checked weather forecasts obsessively, prepared contingency plans, packed extra supplies. Looking back, it's almost laughable how prepared we thought we were. The first day went exactly according to plan. We set out from the trailhead early morning, made good progress through the snow-covered forest. The weather was clear, around 25 degrees Celsius with minimal wind, pretty much perfect conditions for a winter climb. Everyone was in high spirits, cracking jokes as we ascended through the tree line. I remember Marcus telling stories about some Sherpa guides he'd met in Nepal. We established our first camp at about 6,500 feet. After setting up tents, we gathered around our portable stoves for dinner. I still remember that meal, freeze-dried beef stew that tasted incredible after the day's exertion. The sunset that evening was stunning, casting pink and orange light across the snowfields above us. None of us had any idea what was coming. The second day was more challenging. The terrain steepened considerably, and we had to navigate some tricky sections with our full packs. The wind picked up a bit, but nothing concerning. By late afternoon, we'd reached our high camp at around 9,200 feet. We set up 3 tents, Chris and I in one, Emma and Sam in another, and the Taylor brothers with Marcus in the largest one. The plan was to make our summit push the following morning, weather permitting. After dinner, we did our usual equipment check and weather assessment. There was a system moving in, but according to our forecast, It wasn't supposed to hit until we'd be off the mountain. We turned in around 9 that evening. I remember checking my watch. It was exactly 9:17 p.m. before zipping up my sleeping bag. The first avalanche hit at 11:42 p.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch the moment I was jolted awake. There was this deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Before I could even sit up, our tent was being pushed sideways by a wave of snow. I yelled for Chris to brace himself as the tent partially collapsed on us. When it stopped, maybe 30 seconds later, we tore our way out of the damaged tent. The Taylor brothers and Marcus were already outside, their tent also partially buried but intact. We frantically called for Emma and Sam. For about 10 horrifying seconds, there was no answer. Then we heard Emma's voice from beneath a pile of snow where their tent had been. We dug like madmen and found their tent had been pushed about 15 feet and was half buried, but both women were unharmed. We gathered in what remained of the Taylors' tent to assess the situation. No one was injured, but 2 tents were damaged and some of our gear had been scattered. We could see that the avalanche had come down from a slope about 200 yards above our camp, a slope we'd assessed as stable just hours earlier. That's when we made the decision that would haunt me forever. Instead of attempting an immediate descent in the dark, we decided to secure what remained of our camp, collect our scattered gear, and prepare for an emergency descent at first light. The weather was deteriorating, but there were no immediate signs of more avalanche danger. We spent the next couple of hours reinforcing our position, retrieving buried equipment, and preparing emergency packs. At 2:17 a.m., again, I remember checking my watch, the second avalanche hit. This one was massively larger than the first. I was outside with Rob when we heard it coming. There was no time to warn the others. The wall of snow hit with such force that I was instantly knocked off my feet. I remember tumbling, completely disoriented, unable to breathe or see. When I finally stopped moving, I was buried up to my chest, my left arm pinned at my side. I don't know how long I was there before I managed to free myself. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. The entire campsite was gone, just gone. Where our tents had been was now nothing but churned up snow. I started screaming for the others, my voice sounding strange and small against the vastness of the mountain. Rob appeared first, limping badly with a gash on his forehead. He'd been thrown about 30 yards from where we'd been standing. Together, we started searching frantically, calling out names over and over. We found Chris first. He'd been carried nearly 100 yards down the slope and was half buried in snow. He was conscious, but clearly in shock. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, compound fracture of the tibia, we'd later learn. Sam we found next, unconscious but breathing. She had a serious head injury and what looked like broken ribs. Emma was discovered about 20 minutes later, partially protected by a large boulder that had stopped her from being carried further down the mountain. Her shoulder was dislocated, and she had hypothermia setting in, but she was alive. Will and Marcus were nowhere to be found. We searched until dawn broke, using avalanche probes from our recovered gear, but the search area was huge, and the avalanche had scattered debris over a massive section of the mountainside. Around 6 a.m., with the faint light of dawn, Rob spotted something bright red against the snow about 200 yards down the slope. It was Will's jacket. He was buried under about 3 feet of snow, barely conscious and severely hypothermic. There was no sign of Marcus. The realization hit us like a physical blow. Marcus was gone. But we couldn't stop to process it. We had 4 injured people who needed immediate medical attention, and we were stranded at 9,000 feet in deteriorating conditions. Our situation was dire. The avalanches had completely altered the landscape, making our planned descent routes impassable. 2 of our emergency beacons had been damaged. The weather, which was supposed to hold for another day, was rapidly worsening. Heavy snow began falling, and the temperature was dropping fast. We managed to establish a sheltered position using what remained of our tents and equipment. Sam regained consciousness, but was confused and in pain. Chris was stoic, despite his clearly broken leg, which we splinted as best we could. Will was in the worst shape, severely hypothermic and drifting in and out of consciousness. By noon, it was obvious we were in serious trouble. The temperature had dropped to about 5 degrees Celsius, and visibility was down to maybe 20 feet in the blowing snow. We had limited medical supplies, damaged communications equipment, and no clear path down the mountain. That's when Chris volunteered to attempt a solo descent to get help. We argued against it. His leg was broken, the conditions were terrible, but he insisted it was our only chance. We reluctantly agreed, giving him one of the partially functioning emergency beacons, our remaining GPS unit, and as much food and water as he could carry. He set out around 1 p.m. The last thing he said to me was, "If I'm not back by dark, don't wait for me." I remember watching his figure disappear into the whiteout, wondering if I'd just sent my friend to his death. The next few hours were the longest of my life. Sam used what medical knowledge she had to tend to Will, whose condition was worsening. Emma, despite her dislocated shoulder, helped Rob reinforce our shelter against the intensifying storm. I took inventory of our supplies and tried repeatedly to get a signal on our satellite phone, with no success. Around 7 p.m., as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted to what must have been 15 degrees, we heard someone calling from outside our shelter. It was Chris, somehow still alive, but in terrible shape. He'd become completely disoriented in the whiteout conditions and had been wandering in circles for hours before somehow finding his way back to us. The relief of seeing him alive quickly gave way to the crushing realization that we were now truly on our own. The next 5 days blur together in my memory. The storm raged without pause. We rationed our remaining food and fuel, melted snow for water, and took turns keeping watch over Will, whose condition deteriorated by the hour. Sam did everything possible with our limited medical supplies, but without proper treatment, there was only so much she could do. On what I think was the 7th day, Will's breathing became increasingly labored. Rob barely left his brother's side, talking to him constantly, refusing to accept that we might lose him too. I'd never felt so helpless in my life. That afternoon, while searching through some of the avalanche debris we'd collected, I found a damaged high-frequency radio that had belonged to Marcus. It was partially crushed, but when I fiddled with it, the power light flickered on. For the next few hours, I repeatedly sent out Mayday calls, not knowing if anyone could hear us. Around dusk, a crackling voice responded. It was a Forestry Service operator who had picked up our transmission. I'll never forget the surge of hope I felt in that moment. I quickly relayed our situation and location as best I could before the radio died completely. But our ordeal wasn't over. The weather remained too severe for any rescue attempt. We spent 3 more agonizing days in our makeshift shelter, watching Will grow weaker despite his brother's desperate efforts to keep him warm and conscious. Rob would tell stories from their childhood, forcing Will to respond, refusing to let him slip away. On the 10th day, we heard the distant thump of helicopter rotors. The storm had broken just enough for a specialized high-altitude rescue helicopter to attempt an evacuation. I remember stumbling out of our shelter, waving frantically as the helicopter hovered above us, the downdraft whipping snow into a frenzy. The rescue itself is another blur. I remember harnesses being lowered, rescue personnel securing our injured team members, the deafening roar of the helicopter. I was the last one up, and as I was being lifted, I looked back at our camp one last time, thinking of Marcus still somewhere on that mountain. We were all hospitalized for various injuries and severe exposure. Will survived, though he lost several toes to frostbite. Chris needed multiple surgeries on his leg. Sam recovered from her head injury, but still suffers from occasional seizures. Emma's shoulder never regained full mobility. Marcus's body was recovered weeks later when conditions finally allowed for a proper search. The investigation concluded that he'd been carried nearly half a mile by the second avalanche before coming to rest in a crevasse. I've replayed those decisions 1,000 times in my mind. What if we'd descended immediately after the first avalanche? What if we'd set up camp in a different location? What if I'd recognized the danger signs that now seem so obvious in hindsight? The Glacier Peak incident, as it came to be known in mountaineering circles, prompted significant changes in winter climbing protocols. But that's cold comfort to those of us who lived through it, and especially to Marcus's family. I haven't been back to Glacier Peak. I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes when it snows heavily, I wake up in a panic, convinced I'm back on that mountain, hearing that deep rumble that changed our lives forever. Story 3. I've been a long-haul trucker for 16 years now. You learn a lot of things. On the road, where to find decent coffee at 3 in the morning, which truck stops have the cleanest showers, how to stay awake when your eyelids feel like they're made of cement. But nothing in those 16 years prepared me for what happened last month on a back road in Nebraska. I'm not the type to make up stories. Ask anyone who knows me. Alec Morrison is about as straightforward as they come. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap. At least I didn't used to. It was a Tuesday night in October. I was hauling a load of farm equipment from Des Moines to Kearney, Nebraska. Should have been a simple run, 7 hours tops. I'd done it dozens of times before, but around 6 in the evening, I got a notification on my trucker app that I-80 was closed due to a major accident involving a chemical spill. The app suggested a detour that would add about an hour to my trip, taking me on some state highways instead. No big deal, right? I called my dispatcher, let them know I'd be running late, and took the suggested alternate route. The sun was already setting, but I wasn't worried. I had 3/4 of a tank of fuel, some beef jerky, and a thermos of coffee. Just another night on the road. Everything was fine for the first couple hours. Traffic was light, mostly just local vehicles and a few other trucks who'd gotten the same detour message. But then things started getting weird. About 40 miles east of Grand Island, I came across construction signs I hadn't seen on previous trips. Orange diamond-shaped signs reading "Road Work Ahead," followed by detour arrows directing traffic onto a smaller county road. My GPS didn't show any construction, but that's not unusual. Those systems don't always get updated right away. I followed the detour signs, figuring they'd lead me back to the main highway after a few miles. But instead, they kept directing me onto increasingly smaller roads. Asphalt turned to chip seal, then to gravel. My rig isn't meant for these kinds of roads, but turning around would have been nearly impossible on these narrow lanes. So I kept going, hoping each turn would lead back to pavement. After about 30 minutes of this, I started getting concerned. The roads were getting worse, not better. My GPS showed me in the middle of nowhere, with no indication of the detours I was following. I tried to call my dispatcher to ask if they knew anything about these back roads, but I had no cell service. Then I noticed my fuel gauge. It had dropped to a quarter tank. That wasn't right. I should have had plenty of fuel to reach Kearney. Maybe the rough roads were eating up more diesel than usual, but it still seemed to be dropping way too fast. I was seriously considering trying to find a place to turn around when I spotted a small light up ahead. As I got closer, I could make out a single building sitting by itself along the road. A sign illuminated by a single flickering bulb read, "Last Chance Gas and General Store." I've never been so relieved to see a gas station in my life. It wasn't much, just a small wooden building with two ancient pumps out front, but it was something. I pulled in, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The pumps were the old-style ones with mechanical numbers that flip over, not digital. The store itself was dimly lit, with a hand-painted sign in the window that said, "Open." I shut off my engine and stepped down from the cab, stretching my legs. The air was cold and unnaturally still. No traffic sounds, no distant farm equipment, not even insects chirping. Just dead silence. The door to the store opened, and an elderly man stepped out. He was tall and gaunt with wispy white hair and wore overalls that hung loose on his frame. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Evening, driver," he called out. "You look a bit lost." "Following the detour signs," I explained. "They've taken me pretty far off course. You know how long this construction's been going on?" He nodded slowly. "Going on 3-4 weeks now. Government men came through, set up all those signs, said they're doing soil testing or some such thing." He shrugged. "Bad for business, but what can you do?" Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me, but I was more concerned about my fuel situation. "Mind if I fill up? Not sure how much farther I need to go before hitting pavement again." "Help yourself," he said, gesturing to the pumps. "These old girls still work fine. Come inside when you're done to settle up." I thanked him and grabbed the pump handle. That's when I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. At the edge of the property, where the circle of light from the station faded into darkness, there was a woman standing perfectly still. She was wearing what looked like a business suit or some kind of formal clothing, something completely out of place for this remote location. She was maybe in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back tightly, and she was staring directly at me. I nodded to her, thinking maybe she worked with the old man, but she didn't respond. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and made a gesture I couldn't mistake. She was waving me away, urgently motioning for me to get back in my truck and leave. Not just leave, but specifically to go back the way I'd come. I glanced toward the store to see if the old man had noticed her, but he'd gone back inside. When I looked back to where she'd been standing, she was closer now, maybe 30 feet away, still making that same urgent gesture. Her face was dead serious, and there was something in her eyes that sent a chill through me. Not anger, but fear. Genuine fear. She pointed at my truck, then back down the road I'd come from, then made a cutting motion across her throat. My heart started pounding. I'm a big guy, 6'2", 230 pounds, and I don't scare easily. But something about this woman's intensity, the desperation in her gestures, triggered every alarm bell in my head. The store door opened again and the old man stepped out. "Pump giving you trouble?" he called. I looked at him, then back to where the woman had been standing. She was gone, completely vanished. "No, I thought I saw someone," I said. He squinted into the darkness. "Ain't nobody out here but us, driver. Nearest neighbor's 5 miles down the road." I nodded. but my hands were shaking as I hung the pump back up without using it. Something was very wrong here. The old man's casual manner, the woman's warning, the fact that my GPS showed nothing but open farmland where this gas station stood, none of it added up. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think I've got enough fuel to make it to Grand Island. I should get moving if I want to make my delivery on time." The old man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Suit yourself," he said, "but those detour signs go on for quite a ways. Might be smarter to fuel up while you can." "I'll take my chances," I said, already climbing back into my cab. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the key twice before getting the engine started. As I pulled away, I glanced in my mirror. The old man was still standing by the pumps, watching me go. And for just a second, I thought I saw the woman again, standing in the darkness behind the store, nodding in approval. I don't remember much about the next 20 minutes, except the pounding of my heart and the way my headlights seemed to be swallowed by the darkness ahead. I kept expecting to see more detour signs, but instead, I came to a crossroads. One way continued following the detours deeper into nowhere. The other was the road I'd originally been detoured from. Despite the road closed signs, I turned back onto the main road. It was perfectly fine. No construction, no barriers, nothing that justified a detour. I pushed my speed as much as I dared on the dark highway, watching my fuel gauge drop lower and lower. I made it to State Road 38, and from there to Grand Island with my needle hovering just above empty. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw and filled my tank, using nearly twice as much diesel as I should have needed for the distance I'd traveled. Inside, I asked the cashier about construction detours in the area. "No detours on 38 that I know of," she said. "There's some bridge work on County Road D, but that's nowhere near the main highway." I tried to explain what I'd experienced, but the more I talked, the crazier it sounded. Finally, I just paid for my fuel and got back on the road. I completed my delivery in Kearney the next morning, then took a couple of personal days. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I drove back to the area in daylight, retracing my route as best I could. The main roads were exactly where they should be, with no detour signs in sight. But when I tried to find those gravel roads I'd driven down in the dark, I found only unmarked dirt access roads, nothing that could support a semi. And the gas station? Nothing. No building, no pumps, not even a foundation or any sign that a structure had ever stood there. Just an empty field with tall grass waving in the wind. I stopped at a local diner and showed the waitress a rough map I'd drawn of where I thought the gas station had been. Her expression changed immediately. "That's the old Miller place," she said quietly. "There was a gas station there years ago, but it closed down in 1994 when the owner disappeared. Strange case, never solved. Some folks say he just took off, but he left all his belongings behind." "Was he an older man?" I asked. "Tall, thin, white hair?" She looked at me strangely. "That's right. How'd you know? This was nearly 30 years ago." I couldn't answer her. I paid for my coffee and left. I've been back on the road for 3 weeks now. I still drive the secondary highways of the Midwest, but I never, ever deviate from known routes after dark. I keep my fuel tank topped off obsessively, never letting it drop below half. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed at that gas station or continued following those detour signs. I don't want to know. Sometimes I think about that woman and wonder who she was, or what she was. Was she trying to help me? Was she trapped there somehow? I'll never know. But I understand now that there are roads that exist in a different reality after sunset. Detours that lead not to alternate routes, but to places that only emerge when darkness and isolation create the perfect conditions for them to materialize. I've been driving these highways for 16 years, but I never knew what was really out there until now. And some nights, when I'm driving alone and see unexpected detour signs ahead, I remember the woman's warning gesture, and I turn around. Story 4. I never thought I'd be the one writing a post like this, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 12 years, and I still flinch at unexpected knocks at the door. Still check my locks 3 times before bed. Still can't shake the feeling of being watched. Back in January 2011, I was Sheriff Darlene Harper of Glendale County, Michigan. Small department, tight-knit community. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where serious crime was mostly limited to domestic disputes and the occasional drunk driver. I'd been sheriff for just over 4 years then. It was a Tuesday night when the call came in just after 9. Temperatures had dropped to -15, and we'd had about 6 inches of fresh snow that afternoon. I remember because I'd spent an hour shoveling my driveway before my shift. The dispatcher, Mike, told me a trucker had spotted an abandoned vehicle on County Road 27, engine still running, driver's door open. I'd been finishing paperwork, and honestly, I almost sent Deputy Lewis instead. Thank God I didn't. That decision would have haunted me even more than what actually happened. County Road 27 is just a long stretch of nothing. Farmland on one side, thick woods on the other. No streetlights. It took me about 20 minutes to get there, and I spotted the car immediately. A blue Honda Civic, just sitting there with its headlights cutting through the darkness, exhaust puffing into the frigid air. I pulled up behind it, called in my position, and approached with my flashlight. The driver's door was wide open, interior light still on. The seat was pushed way forward, clearly set for someone shorter than me. There was a purse on the passenger seat. No signs of an accident, no damage to the vehicle. What made the hair on my neck stand up were the footprints in the snow. You could read them like a story, and it wasn't a good one. A single set leading from the driver's door, then signs of a struggle, disturbed snow, deeper impressions like someone had fallen, then a second set of prints, larger, probably a man's. Both sets led toward the tree line, but only the larger set came back, heading to where another vehicle had clearly been parked about 20 yards behind where the Civic was now. I called for backup immediately. While waiting, I carefully checked the car. The purse contained a wallet with ID for Natalie Weber, 32 years old. There was also a hospital badge. She was a nurse at Glendale Memorial. Her phone was still in the cup holder, which struck me as odd. If she'd gotten out voluntarily, she would have taken it. The keys were in the ignition. When deputies Lewis and Ramirez arrived, we secured the scene and started a grid search. We followed the footprints into the woods about 50 yards before they became impossible to track on the frozen ground beneath the trees. We found a scarf that her family later identified as Natalie's, snagged on a branch. By morning, we had a full search team out there, K-9 units, state police, volunteers. The dogs lost the scent at a gravel access road about a quarter mile into the woods. Someone had taken her, and they'd planned it well enough to know where to park and how to disappear. 3 days into the investigation, we caught what seemed like a break. A hunter checking his trail cameras found images of what appeared to be someone being dragged through the snow near an abandoned hunting cabin about 4 miles from where we found Natalie's car. The timestamp matched our timeline. I led the team that checked out the cabin. It was small, just one room with a fireplace and some broken furniture. What we found turned my stomach. Blood spatter on the wall that later matched Natalie's type. zip ties attached to an old metal bed frame, a space heater that had been recently used. It was still plugged in. But no Natalie. Whoever took her had moved her again, and we had no idea where. We set up roadblocks, interviewed everyone who lived within 10 miles, checked every abandoned building we could find. Nothing. Then the calls started. The first one came to my direct line at the station, 1 week after Natalie disappeared. Male voice, using one of those voice disguiser things that made him sound robotic. "You're looking in the wrong places, Sheriff Harper. She fought hard, scratched me pretty good when I pulled her from the car." We hadn't released that detail about signs of struggle. He knew because he was there. I tried to keep him talking, to trace the call, but he hung up after less than 30 seconds. The call came from a burner phone, already ditched by the time we tracked its location to a gas station 20 miles away. 2 days later, another call. The cabin was just temporary. I only needed it for a few hours. "You looked tired when you were there, Sheriff. That red sweater you wore didn't suit you." I had worn a red sweater under my jacket that day. No press had been present during our search of the cabin. No photos released. He had been watching us, watching me. The next morning, I was discussing the case with my deputies when the receptionist brought in an envelope that had been left at the front desk. Inside was a detailed description of everything we'd found in Natalie's car, including items we hadn't made public. It ended with, "You're all working so hard, it's almost cute." I felt violated. Our investigation was being monitored somehow. I ordered a sweep for bugs in the department, changed our protocols so we'd only discuss the case in secure areas. Nothing helped. 2 weeks after Natalie disappeared, a delivery man brought an envelope to the station. Inside was Natalie's blood-stained hospital ID badge with a handwritten note. "I'm watching you fail." The delivery service had been paid in cash. The sender used a fake name. Another dead end. We dug deeper into Natalie's life. Colleagues, patients, everyone she knew. One name kept coming up: Frank Denton, a hospital security guard who'd been fired 6 months earlier after multiple complaints from female staff, including one from Natalie. He'd apparently made inappropriate comments, followed her to her car once. The hospital had handled it internally, never called us. When we went to question Denton, his house was empty. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him in weeks. He'd told some of them he was going to visit family in Florida, but the house didn't look like someone had left temporarily. The refrigerator was completely empty, no mail piling up. He'd planned to be gone. We got a warrant and searched the place. In the basement, behind a false wall, we found a room that still gives me nightmares. Newspaper clippings about missing women across the Midwest, detailed notes, maps with locations marked, and photographs, surveillance photos of Natalie leaving work, shopping, at her apartment complex, and photos of other women too. 7 that we could identify. We put out an APB on Denton, but it was like he'd vanished. 6 agonizing months passed. Each day, I felt like I was failing Natalie and her family. Her parents called weekly, desperate for updates I couldn't give them. Then, a break. Denton was arrested in Ohio after a woman escaped an attempted abduction and identified him. When we got there to question him, what he said chilled me to the bone. "Must have been cold out there on County Road 27 that night, Sheriff Harper. The kind of night when your breath freezes in front of your face." He knew things only the killer would know. Details about the scene, about our investigation. I asked him how he knew, if he had someone inside our department. He just smiled. "I didn't need anyone inside. I was standing in the trees when you found her car. I watched you examine the scene through binoculars. I was parked across the street from your house 3 nights after she disappeared, watched you through your kitchen window making those phone calls. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those times I'd felt watched, I actually was being watched. He'd been stalking not just Natalie, but our entire investigation. Stalking me. Denton eventually made a deal. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he led us to Natalie's remains in a remote forest clearing over in Cass County. During his trial, the full horror was revealed. 7 victims across 3 states over 11 years. His background as a former security guard and his collection of different uniforms had allowed him to move through public spaces unnoticed. People see the uniform, not the person, he explained with disturbing calmness during his testimony. I could walk into most buildings without anyone questioning me. He'd sit in hospital cafeterias, pretending to be an off-duty cop, stand near crime scenes in a security uniform, hide in plain sight, all while hunting for his next victim and monitoring the investigations into his previous crimes. It fundamentally changed how I approach my work and my personal security. I installed a security system in my home, started varying my routes to work, became more aware of my surroundings. I still work in law enforcement, but now I teach at the academy. My key message to cadets is always the same. The most dangerous predators aren't just watching their victims. They're watching you, studying how you work. While you're looking for them, they're looking right back at you. I know this might sound paranoid, but Denton taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Even now, 12 years later, I can't shake the feeling of being observed. Last week, I was shopping at the grocery store and felt someone watching me. I turned around and caught a man quickly looking away. Probably nothing, but I left my cart and exited immediately. My husband thinks I should see someone about it, says it's not healthy to live this way. Maybe he's right, but he wasn't there. He didn't see Denton's face when he described watching me through my own kitchen window, knowing I had no idea he was there. I still haven't installed curtains in my home office. It's on the 2nd floor, and I tell myself no one can see in. But sometimes, when I'm working late and look up at that dark window, I can't help but wonder, is someone out there, right now, watching me fail to move on? Story 5. I never thought I'd write this down, but I need to get it out. I'm retiring in a couple months, and these memories still keep me up at night. The dates burned into my memory. March 4th, 2019. I was finishing up paperwork in my office when Dale Pritchard called. Dale's a land surveyor, known him since high school. His voice was shaky, not like him at all. Drew, you need to come out to the old Keeling quarry, now. I asked him what was wrong, but all he said was, just get here, please. I'd been sheriff of Sparrow County for almost 15 years by then. Small county in Ohio, population just under 30,000. Most of our cases were simple stuff: drunk driving, domestic disputes, occasional drug busts. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to walk into. The old limestone quarry had been abandoned since the 90s. Dale was standing by his truck when I pulled up, face white as a sheet. He just pointed toward a partially collapsed section where some recent rainfall had caused erosion. Over there, I was taking measurements for the new development project and saw something. That something was a human hand, partially embedded in a concrete slab that had been exposed by the erosion. Not just a hand, an arm to the elbow, sticking out at an unnatural angle. The concrete had cracked enough to reveal it. My stomach dropped. 17 years in law enforcement, and nothing hits you like seeing human remains where they shouldn't be. I called it in immediately, secured the scene. By nightfall, we had state investigators and forensics teams setting up floodlights. The hand belonged to a male, and as they carefully chipped away at the concrete, the full horror came into view. Not just one body, but 3 adult males, positioned in ways that made it clear they'd been placed deliberately, all bound. All had suffered violent trauma before death. The forensic anthropologist on scene, Dr. Mercer, took one look and said something I'll never forget. These men were put in this concrete while still alive. I've seen bad things in my career, but that moment, I had to walk away for a minute. The thought of someone being held down, feeling concrete being poured over them. Jesus. Initial estimates put the bodies at 10 to 15 years old. We were looking at murders from the early 2000s. 3 days later, things got even worse. A plain white envelope arrived at the station addressed to me personally. Inside was a handwritten letter, no signature, no fingerprints. It read, "Sheriff Callahan, the men in the quarry were not the first. They won't be the last you find." He called it cleansing. I've marked where the others are. I'm sorry. Attached was a hand-drawn map of Sparrow County with 7 X marks in red. One was the quarry. The others were scattered across the county, an abandoned barn foundation, a culvert off Route 33, the old mill site, places most people wouldn't look twice at. I assembled a task force immediately. We started excavations at the first location the next morning, the foundation of an old barn that had burned down in 2007. By noon, we'd found it, another concrete slab, this one containing 2 bodies, a man and a woman. Over the next week, we confirmed the map's terrible accuracy. Each site contained concrete slabs. Each slab contained human remains. All showed the same pattern, bound, tortured, buried alive in concrete. In total, 19 victims, 12 men, 7 women. The forensic team estimated the killings occurred between 1998 and 2005. 19 people, in my county, for 7 years. And nobody had connected the dots. Some were reported missing, sure, but they were the kind of people who might disappear without raising alarms. Drifters, addicts, people estranged from their families. Others had never been reported missing at all. They'd simply vanished, and the world had kept turning without them. 10 days into the investigation, another plain envelope arrived. This one contained a single piece of paper with an address and time. No explanation, just 42 Mockingbird Lane. Tomorrow, noon. Come alone or I won't be there. I know what you're thinking. Only an idiot would go alone. But this was our only lead. I told my deputy where I was going, had a plainclothes officer position himself nearby, and went to the address. 42. Mockingbird was a small ranch house on the edge of town. Neat yard, drawn curtains. Nothing that screamed serial killer lives here. A woman opened the door before I could knock. Late 30s, thin, with the hollow-eyed look of someone carrying a heavy weight. "Sheriff Callahan," she said. "I'm Elaine Morgan. You'd better come in." Her living room was tidy but sparse. She sat across from me, hands folded in her lap. "I sent the letters," she said without preamble. "I helped Robert bury them, not kill them. I never did that. But I helped after. I helped hide what he did." Robert Egan. The name meant nothing to me at first, then it clicked. Local concrete contractor who died back in 2005. Heart attack at 49. I'd never met him, but the business had been moderately successful. Elaine had been his girlfriend. After his death, she'd inherited his property and business, though she'd sold the business quickly. She'd lived quietly since then, barely a blip on anyone's radar. "Why now?" I asked her. "Why come forward after all this time?" She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a hospital bracelet. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. I can't die with this secret anymore." Over the next 2 hours, she told me everything. She'd met Robert in 1997. Charming, successful, attentive. 6 months into their relationship, she discovered his hobby. "He brought home this man," she said, voice flat. "Drug addict," he said. "No one would miss him. Had him in the basement. Made me watch what he did." Robert Egan had methodically abducted and murdered his victims over 7 years. He targeted what he called human waste: addicts, prostitutes, homeless people, people he believed wouldn't be missed. He called it cleansing, Elaine said. Said he was removing waste from the world, making it better. He'd hold them for days sometimes. Then the concrete, he said it was fitting, turning waste into something solid and permanent. She helped because she was terrified of him, because he threatened to kill her family if she didn't, because after the first few, she felt complicit already. The details she provided matched our evidence exactly. The binding methods, the concrete composition, the locations. The killings stopped in 2005 when Egan died suddenly of a heart attack. Elaine had lived with the secret ever since, afraid to come forward, afraid of what would happen to her. The cancer diagnosis had finally pushed her to reveal the truth. "There's more," she said, handing me a key. "His workshop, on the property I sold. The new owners never knew about the storm cellar. It's still there, just like he left it." We took her into custody. She led us to Egan's former property, now owned by a young family who'd never suspected what lay beneath their backyard. The storm cellar entrance was hidden beneath a garden shed. Inside, I've been to crime scenes. I've seen terrible things. But that cellar, it was a museum of horror, a makeshift torture chamber preserved exactly as it had been at his death. Tools laid out neatly, a concrete mixing area, chains bolted to the walls, and a desk with a leather-bound journal containing detailed entries for each victim. Names when he knew them, descriptions when he didn't, dates, methods, his sick justifications. Some entries were clinical, others were filled with disturbing philosophical ramblings about purifying society. He'd even taken photographs, carefully labeled and stored in acid-free sleeves. The man had documented his atrocities like someone might catalog stamp collections. One entry stood out: October 12, 2001. Subject number 8 lasted longer than expected, nearly 3 days of resistance before final procedure. Remarkable will to live for someone who contributed nothing to society. Perhaps the worthless cling hardest to life precisely because they've done nothing with it. I'll never forget those words, or the photos that accompanied them. The victim was a young woman, maybe 25. We later identified her as Melissa Kerrigan, reported missing in 1999. She'd had a drug problem, left behind a 5-year-old daughter. That child was 14 when we found her mother's remains. Elaine Morgan pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. 20 years, possibility of parole after 7. She died 14 months into her sentence, the cancer progressing faster than doctors predicted. Before she died, she met with several victims' families, providing details that helped them understand what had happened to their loved ones. Small comfort, but some said it helped. We identified 16 of the 19 victims. 3 remain unknown to this day. The case changed how we handle missing persons reports in Sparrow County, especially involving transient individuals. Egan's former property was demolished, and the land was converted into a nature preserve with a memorial to the victims. What keeps me up at night isn't just the horror of what happened. It's how easily evil hid in plain sight. It's how 19 people vanished without raising sufficient alarms because they existed on the periphery of society's attention. It's knowing that Robert Egan was a man people greeted at the grocery store, hired for home projects, passed on the street without a second glance. Sometimes I drive by the memorial. 19 names, 19 lives. Each one had a story that ended in concrete, alone and afraid. And for years, no one was looking for them. No one connected the dots. I retire next month after 20 years as sheriff. Most days I can function normally, but there are moments, seeing concrete being poured at a construction site, passing the nature preserve that sits on top of that cellar, meeting a new drifter in town, when it all comes rushing back, the hands reaching out from concrete, the journal entries, the hollow look in Elaine's eyes. Evil doesn't announce itself. It pours foundations, shops at hardware stores, waves to neighbors. It hides in plain sight until someone starts digging. Story 6. I've been driving trucks for 23 years, over 2 million miles across this country, through every kind of weather and terrain you can imagine. My Kenworth T680 is more familiar to me than my own house at this point. I know every rattle, every quirk, every sound it makes. I can tell when something's off just by the way it feels beneath me. What happened 3 weeks ago on Highway 50 in Nevada still has me shaken. I haven't told many people about this. My dispatcher thinks I'm just being dramatic when I refuse routes through central Nevada now. My wife thinks I need therapy for PTSD from something that happened on the road. She's not wrong. It started with a bridge collapse on I-80 near Elko. Nothing unusual there. Infrastructure in this country is falling apart. Dispatch rerouted me south to Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America. I'd avoided it for years, not because of any ghost stories, but because there's nothing out there. No cell service for long stretches, towns that are barely towns. Just you, the road, and hundreds of miles of sagebrush and emptiness. I left Wells around 2 in the afternoon. The route would take me through Ely, Eureka, Austin, and eventually to Fallon before heading north again. The detour would cost me about 6 hours, but that's the job. Adaptability is what separates the professionals from the wannabes in this business. The first few hours were uneventful, just miles of high desert and distant mountain ranges. I had my CB radio on channel 19 like always, listening to the usual chatter, road conditions, speed traps, the occasional political rant. Normal stuff. Around 7 that evening, as the sun was starting to sink behind the mountains, I heard something unusual on the CB. A woman's voice, calm but with an edge of urgency. "This is Rebecca Scheller. My car broke down at milepost 346. Can anyone help? I've been waiting for hours." Nothing too strange about that. Happens all the time. Except nobody answered her. I keyed my mic and responded that I was eastbound on 50 and would look for her at that marker. No response. About 20 minutes later, she came on again. Exact same message, same tone, like she was reading from a script. I responded again, asked for more details about her vehicle. Nothing. I figured maybe she couldn't hear responses or was on a different channel. Some newer drivers don't understand how the CB system works. I kept an eye out for milepost 346 and any stranded vehicles. When I reached milepost 343, I slowed down, expecting to see 346 soon. But after 345 came 347. I even pulled over to check my map. No marker 46. I thought maybe I missed it or it was knocked down. At a truck stop in Eureka, I asked another driver if he'd heard the woman on the CB. He gave me a strange look. Rebecca Scheller? On Highway 50? Yeah, I've heard her. Lots of us have. It's a ghost story, man. Been circulating for years. I laughed it off. I don't believe in that supernatural nonsense. There's always a logical explanation. But when I mentioned the missing milepost, he just shook his head. There is no milepost 346 on Highway 50. Never has been. I chalked it up to a prank. Some locals messing with out-of-town truckers. Happens all the time in these small rural areas where entertainment is limited. I reached Austin around 9:30 and needed to fuel up. The gas station was one of those old-school places with a small convenience store attached. The attendant was an older guy, probably in his 70s, with leathery skin and eyes that had seen too much sun. When I handed him my card, he looked at my company logo and asked where I was headed. Reno, I told him, taking the long way because of the I-80 closure. He nodded slowly. Been an uptick in trucks coming through, not used to this much traffic. He swiped my card and handed it back. You be careful out there, especially after dark. I smiled politely. The wildlife? That too, he said, not returning the smile. You heard anything strange on your radio today? The hair on my arm stood up. Like what? Like a woman asking for help. Name of Rebecca. I nodded. Actually, yeah. Someone playing games? He leaned in closer. His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. Rebecca Scheller disappeared on this highway in 1987. Car found abandoned near Austin. Parts of her were found eventually. Not all of her, though. I'm not easily spooked, but something about his tone made me uncomfortable. So some sick local is using her name for a prank. Real classy. He shrugged. Maybe. The strange thing is, people have been hearing her voice for 35 years now, long before digital tech made that kind of thing easy. I thanked him and left, trying to shake off the uneasiness. Ghost stories don't scare me. People do. And someone was clearly playing a twisted game with travelers. About 15 miles west of Austin, I spotted a place called Cold Front Lodge. It wasn't in my trucker's guide, but it had a large gravel lot that could accommodate my rig and a vacancy sign lit up. I was ahead of schedule despite the detour and suddenly felt very tired. The thought of pushing on through the night didn't appeal to me. The lodge was rustic but clean. The owner introduced himself as Mac, a former trucker himself who'd bought the place after retiring. There were only about 8 rooms, and mine was at the far end. As I was checking in, 2 Nevada state troopers came in for coffee. They were talking about responding to a call about suspicious activity near the old mining roads. I mentioned the voice on the CB to Mac after the troopers left. He laughed. The Rebecca Scheller thing? Yeah, that's been going on for decades. Those troopers think it's kids from Fallon or Austin with a powerful CB unit. They investigate every few years but never find anything. I took a hot shower and laid down, more tired than I realized. Must have fallen asleep immediately because the next thing I knew, my CB was crackling with static. I'd left it on in my truck, but I could hear it through the thin walls of the lodge. I checked my watch. 2:17 in the morning. The static continued, then cleared. This is Rebecca Scheller. I can hear you now. Please, if anyone is listening, I'm at milepost 396, not 346. He's coming back. Please help me. I sat up, fully awake now. The voice sounded different, more urgent, frightened, and she had responded to earlier attempts to communicate. I pulled on my jeans and boots and went out to my truck. The night was cold and clear, with more stars than you can imagine if you've only lived in cities. I got in and picked up the mic. This is Ray in the Kenworth at Cold Front Lodge. Rebecca, can you hear me? Who's coming back? Static then. He owns the lodge. He's been doing this for years. They all help him. Check the shed behind. The transmission cut off. I tried again, but got nothing but static. I stood outside my truck, scanning the property. The lodge sat alone on the highway, with nothing around for miles. Behind it was empty desert leading to distant mountains. I noticed a pickup truck parked behind the main building, its headlights off. It hadn't been there when I checked in. Then I saw movement. 2 men carrying something heavy from the lodge to the truck, something wrapped in plastic, something person-sized. I ducked behind my trailer, heart pounding. They loaded whatever it was into the truck bed and covered it with a tarp. 1 man went back inside while the other got in the truck. I didn't think, just reacted. I climbed into my rig as quietly as possible, fired it up, and pulled out onto the highway. In my mirror, I saw the lodge door burst open and the second man running out, pointing at my departing truck. I pushed that Kenworth harder than I ever had before, barreling down Highway 50 in the dark. The pickup appeared in my mirrors a few minutes later, gaining on me. I grabbed my phone, still no service. About 10 miles west of the lodge, I noticed something I'd missed on the drive-in. A faded dirt track leading off the highway near a marker that read 396. Not a regular milepost, but some kind of old marker. The track led toward a canyon in the distance. The pickup was right on my tail now, high beams blinding me. I couldn't outrun it in my loaded rig. At the last second, I hit the brakes hard and swerved onto the shoulder. The pickup shot past, then began to brake to turn around. I grabbed my phone and the small emergency pistol I keep locked in my cab and ran into the desert toward a cluster of rocks. Behind me, I heard the pickup returning, its headlights sweeping the area. I spent 3 hours hiding in those rocks, freezing in the desert night. The pickup circled for a while, then left. When I was sure it was gone, I walked back to the highway and flagged down the first vehicle I saw, thankfully a Nevada Highway Patrol car. The trooper was skeptical of my story, but called it in. 2 patrol cars escorted me back to my truck, which was undisturbed, and then to the Cold Front Lodge. The place looked normal in the morning light. Mac came out, concerned about why I'd left in the middle of the night. The troopers searched the property but found nothing suspicious. No shed behind the lodge, no evidence of anything wrapped in plastic. When I described the room I'd stayed in, Mac looked confused. He showed me the lodge layout. There were only 6 rooms, not 8, and none matched the one I described. The final blow came when the troopers ran a check on Rebecca Scheller. No missing persons report, no record of any crime involving someone by that name in Nevada, ever. They let me go after taking my statement. One trooper suggested I might have fallen asleep at the wheel and hallucinated the whole thing. The other hinted that driving too many hours without proper rest could result in my commercial license being reviewed. I finished my delivery in Reno and took 3 days off before heading back east. I've refused any routes through central Nevada since then. I've spent weeks researching Highway 50, the Cold Front Lodge, and Rebecca Scheller. The lodge exists, but older satellite images show different buildings on the property than what I saw. I found nothing about Rebecca Scheller. Last night I was in my truck in a rest area in Ohio when my CB crackled to life around 2 in the morning. Through the static I heard her voice again, fainter this time. "Please help me, milepost 396. Then a different voice, male and gruff. Got another one. I don't know what happened to me on Highway 50. I don't know if Rebecca Scheller ever existed, but I won't be driving the loneliest road again, and I keep my CB turned off at night now. Some voices are better left unanswered." Story 7. I never thought I'd be typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest. Even after 10 years, the nightmares haven't stopped. I wake up drenched in sweat, seeing those empty display cases waiting to be filled. August 14th, 2013 started like any normal day. I'd been sheriff of Riverdale County for almost 8 years at that point, with 20 years total on the force. Small-town Missouri policing isn't exactly what you see on TV crime shows. Mostly we deal with drunk drivers, domestic disputes, occasional drug busts. Nothing prepares you for what I encountered that morning. I was finishing paperwork when dispatch called about a body found in Miller's drainage ditch off County Road 8. Frank Miller, local corn farmer, called it in. I remember driving out there thinking it was probably just a deer someone hit and dumped. We get those calls sometimes. When I pulled up, Frank was pacing by his pickup, looking pale. "Sheriff Keene," he said, "I found her when I was checking the irrigation line. Then I went to call you, and when I came back..." His voice trailed off. "What is it, Frank?" I asked. "She's different now. Someone moved her, fixed her up." That's when my stomach dropped. I followed him down the embankment, and what I saw still haunts me. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, laid out with her hands folded over her stomach. She was wearing this pristine blue dress, the kind you'd see in those 50s advertisements with the full skirt and petticoat. Her makeup was perfect, hair styled in those vintage curls. The most disturbing part? Frank swore when he first found her. She was partially hidden and disheveled. In the 20 minutes it took him to drive to his house and call us, someone had returned and arranged her. I secured the scene immediately and called for backup. My deputy, Marcus Davis, arrived first. The moment he saw her, he whispered, "Jesus Christ, Allison." We'd worked together for years, and I'd never seen him that shaken. The ME confirmed what I suspected. She'd been killed elsewhere and placed there. Her body had been thoroughly washed with some kind of antiseptic. Fingernails trimmed and painted this baby blue color that matched her dress. The lab later found traces of formaldehyde on her skin. We identified her as Teresa Langley, 24, reported missing 3 days earlier after not showing up for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Nothing in her background suggested why someone would do this to her. She was just selected. The worst part was explaining to her parents that their daughter had been murdered and preserved. I've done death notifications before, but nothing like this. Her mother collapsed when I told her Teresa had been posed like some kind of doll. Her father just kept asking why, over and over. I had no answer. 2 weeks later, it happened again. A jogger found another young woman in Carlton Park propped up on a bench, this time in a yellow sundress straight out of the 60s, complete with white gloves and a matching handbag. Same MO, strangled elsewhere, cleaned, dressed, and displayed. This was Michelle Granger, 27, kindergarten teacher, missing for 4 days. By the third victim in late September, Caitlin West, 23, found in a 70s-style disco dress with platform shoes, I knew we were dealing with something beyond my experience. I called the FBI. The profilers said our killer viewed these women as collectibles. Each victim represented a different decade. He was creating some kind of sick timeline. They believed he returned to watch us discover his displays, because that was part of his fantasy, seeing others appreciate his work. We increased patrols everywhere, implemented a curfew, warned women to travel in groups. The town was terrified. People were buying security systems, guns. Parents wouldn't let their kids out of sight. Then Marcus remembered something critical. He'd spotted a vintage car, a 1968 Oldsmobile Cutlass, driving slowly past two of our crime scenes shortly after the bodies were discovered. Not many of those around, especially in mint condition. We tracked it to Edward Phelps, 58, who owned Timeless Treasures, an antique shop downtown specializing in mid-century Americana. I'd been in his shop before. He was always polite, knowledgeable about his merchandise. People respected him as a local business owner. He'd even donated to our department's charity drives. We put him under surveillance. 3 days in, Marcus observed Phelps loading what looked like a rolled carpet into his car trunk at 3 in the morning. We followed him, but he just drove around for hours before returning home. Looking back, I think he was looking for the perfect spot for his next display, but felt our presence. The next day, we got a warrant to search his property, a farmhouse about 5 miles outside town that had belonged to his parents. Nothing in the main house seemed unusual at first. Then we found the basement door, locked with 3 deadbolts. What we discovered down there still makes me sick. 6 rooms, each meticulously decorated to represent a different decade, 50s through 2000s. Display lighting, climate control, glass cases containing mannequins dressed in period clothing, except 3 of the cases were empty. And in the 4th, the 70s room, was Patricia Mills, missing for 2 weeks, standing upright in a glass case, preserved, wearing a floral polyester dress with enormous collar. The ME later confirmed she'd been injected with formaldehyde while still alive. Behind a false wall, we found his journals, hundreds of pages detailing his collection philosophy. He wrote about starting with mannequins but finding them inauthentic and lacking soul. He believed he was honoring these women by making them eternal representatives of their eras. When we arrested him, Phelps didn't resist. He was eerily calm, asked if we'd secured his artifacts properly. During interrogation, he spoke about his victims like they were objects he'd curated. He explained how he selected women who embodied certain qualities he associated with each decade. He called it giving them permanence and making them perfect embodiments of their eras. What disturbed me most was how much he knew about our investigation. He'd been monitoring police frequencies, attending community meetings about the murders, even coming into the station to ask officers about case progress. He'd approached Marcus once in his shop, asking if we had any leads, offering his condolences about the tragic events. After his arrest, we found a storage unit rented under a fake name. Inside were 6 more vintage outfits, each with a name tag pinned to it. 6 more women he'd selected to complete his exhibition. One was my daughter's kindergarten teacher. Another was a nurse at the local clinic where I get my annual physical. He'd been watching them, planning their transformation. The trial was mercifully quick. The evidence was overwhelming. Phelps was sentenced to life without parole for 4 counts of first-degree murder. But even behind bars, he wasn't done tormenting us. 6 months after his conviction, I received a letter. Inside was a list of 6 towns with dates ranging from 1998 to 2005. At the top, he'd written, "My Early Galleries." We've since confirmed 2 locations where human remains were discovered in similar settings. The others are still under investigation. Sometimes I drive past his shop downtown. It's empty now, windows papered over, but I swear I can feel eyes watching from inside. I've had nightmares where I'm walking through those basement rooms, and there's a case with my name on it, waiting to be filled. The worst part is knowing how close he came to completing his collection. How many more women would have disappeared if we hadn't caught him? And I can't shake the feeling that there are others like him out there, people we pass every day, who look at us and don't see humans, but objects to possess. I'm retiring next year. 28 years on the force is enough. I've handled shootings, fatal accidents, even a hostage situation once. But nothing prepared me for Edward Phelps and his carefully curated rooms of horror. Nothing prepared me for seeing Patricia Mills standing in that glass case, her eyes open but unseeing, preserved forever in polyester and hairspray. Sometimes I dream I'm in that case instead of her, standing perfectly still while Phelps adjusts my clothing, fixes my hair, steps back to admire his work. I wake up unable to move, feeling like my skin has been scrubbed raw. The FBI still consults with me occasionally when similar cases emerge. They tell me Phelps won't talk to anyone but me. I've refused every request. I don't want to hear any more about his vision or his collection. I don't want to know if there are more names, more towns, more cases we haven't discovered. What haunts me most isn't the bodies we found, but the knowledge that somewhere out there might be other galleries we haven't discovered yet. Other women standing silently in glass cases, dressed in clothes from another era, waiting to be found. And sometimes, when I pass a vintage clothing store and see those mannequins in the window, I swear they turn their heads to watch me walk by. Story 8. I used to sleep well at night. That feels like a lifetime ago now. It's been 14 years since that first letter arrived, and I still wake up in cold sweats, wondering who was watching us all along. Who knew what we didn't? I was Sheriff Thomas Keller of Red Pine County, Wisconsin for almost 15 years. But it was that 1 month in 2009 that defined everything. My career, my life, my understanding of evil. I want to get this all down while I still can. Maybe someone will make sense of it when I can't. I was 4 years into my first term as sheriff when it happened. October 12th, 2009, a Monday. I remember walking into the station, grabbing my usual black coffee from the break room, and settling into the mountain of paperwork that comes with the job. Janice, our receptionist, knocked on my door around 9:30 with the mail. "Weird one in there, Sheriff," she said, pointing to a plain white envelope with no return address. Just Sheriff Thomas Keller typed on the front. No postmark either. Someone had hand-delivered it. I didn't think much of it at first. Anonymous tips weren't unusual, though they typically came through the hotline, not personal letters to the sheriff. I slid it open with my letter opener and pulled out a single sheet of white paper. The message was typed in plain black text. "Sheriff Keller, you don't know me, but I know what happened to Miranda Collins. Check storage room B at the old Midwest meat processing plant on County Road 7. Come alone if you want proof." My blood ran cold. Miranda Collins had disappeared 3 years earlier, in 2006. Home from college for Thanksgiving break. Just 19 years old. We'd done everything by the book. Searches, interviews, followed every lead. Nothing. Her parents still put up missing posters around town on the anniversary each year. They refused to give up hope, but the case had gone completely cold. I called in my deputies, Johnson and Rivera, and showed them the letter. There was no way I was going alone, despite what the letter said. We drove out to the old meat processing plant that afternoon. The place had been shut down for almost a decade. Graffiti covered the walls, windows were smashed, and the whole building reeked of mold and decay. We had to pry open a rusted side door to get in. "Storage room B," I said, shining my flashlight down a dark hallway. "Let's find it." The place was huge, full of massive empty rooms where they'd once processed cattle. Our footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. It took us almost 30 minutes to locate a row of storage rooms with faded letters on the doors. Room B was locked. Johnson had to break it open with a crowbar from the truck. Inside was nothing but dust, old shelving, and what looked like decades of rodent droppings. I remember feeling deflated, like it was some sick joke. "Check everything," I said. "Every inch." Rivera found it, a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped. We pulled away the cheap paneling to reveal a small cavity. Inside was a plastic bag containing 3 items: Miranda Collins' driver's license, a silver charm bracelet I recognized from her missing persons file, and a man's wristwatch. The watch had an inscription on the back: "To Robert, with pride, Dad, 1997. My hands were shaking. After 3 years, we finally had something concrete. But who was Robert, and who had sent the letter? Back at the station, we ran the watch inscription through our database. Robert Tillman, 44 years old, local mechanic. I remembered him. He'd done maintenance work at the Collins family home around the time Miranda disappeared. We'd interviewed him back then, but he had a solid alibi. He was at a bar with friends the night she vanished. We brought him in for questioning, got a warrant to search his property. In the trunk of an old car behind his garage, our forensics team found traces of blood that matched Miranda's DNA. The case broke wide open. Tillman lawyered up and refused to talk. Exactly 1 week after the first letter, on October 19th, another envelope arrived. Same unmarked delivery, same typed message. "Good work, Sheriff. 1 found, 3 to go. Whitford Park, the old well. You have until Friday." 3 to go. What did that mean? There were other missing persons cases in Red Pine County over the years, but nothing that seemed connected. We found the well in Whitford Park. It wasn't on any maps. It had been covered with plywood and concealed by brush. When we pulled it open and sent a camera down, we found human remains. They turned out to belong to Eliza Watterson, a 22-year-old who disappeared in 2001. Everyone thought she'd moved away for a job in Chicago. The third letter came on October 26th, directing us to an unmarked grave near the county line. We found Carol Masterson there, a bank teller who supposedly moved away in 1998. The fourth letter arrived November 2nd, pointing us to a shallow grave behind an abandoned cabin where we recovered the remains of Patricia Donahue, who disappeared in 1997. But this letter contained something else. 5 words that changed everything. The monster wore a badge. A cop. The letter was saying a cop did this. I can't describe the feeling. In my gut, when I read those words, it was like the floor had dropped out from under me. Who among my people could have done this? Who had I been working alongside all these years? I brought in the state investigators. We had to handle this carefully. The evidence pointed to crimes spanning over a decade. I ordered a complete review of all 4 cases. What connected them? Who had handled all 4? The answer turned my stomach. William Garrett, my predecessor, my mentor, the man who had trained me, who had handpicked me as his successor when he retired 6 years earlier. He had been the responding officer or lead investigator on all 4 cases. Forensics found specialized boot polish used by police at all 4 crime scenes. When we searched Garrett's property, we found a hidden floor safe in his workshop containing jewelry and other personal items belonging to all 4 victims. I was the one who put the cuffs on him. November 9th, 2009. He was 67 by then, living alone in a cabin outside town. He didn't resist, didn't even look surprised, just gave me this hollow smile and said, "Took you long enough, Tommy." The investigation revealed his pattern. Each victim had filed a police report that Garrett personally handled and subsequently dismissed. Miranda Collins had reported a suspicious man following her home from work. Eliza Watterson had reported harassment. Carol Masterson had reported threatening phone calls. Patricia Donahue had reported a break-in. In each case, Garrett had made the reports disappear. He'd been killing for years, hiding behind his badge, knowing no one would look too closely at the respected sheriff of Red Pine County. I thought it was over when we locked him up. The anonymous tipster had helped us catch a serial killer. But 3 months after Garrett's arrest, in February 2010, a final letter arrived, not at the station, but at my home, my private address. Sheriff Keller, my name was Margaret Donahue. I was Patricia's mother. By the time you read this, I will have been gone for some time. Cancer took me in 2007. But before I died, I gathered everything I could on William Garrett. I suspected him after my daughter disappeared. No one would listen to a grieving mother's suspicions about the beloved sheriff. So I investigated on my own for years. I'm sorry I couldn't come forward while I was alive. I hope the information I've provided has brought justice for my Patricia and the others. May they rest in peace now. We found Margaret's journals, confirming she had indeed suspected Garrett. But handwriting analysis showed the letters sent to me were written by someone else, someone who had access to her information. To this day, we don't know who sent those letters or how they knew where to find the evidence. Garrett was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder in 2011. He died in prison in 2017, taking whatever secrets he still had to his grave. I served as sheriff until my retirement 2 years ago, in 2021. I implemented dozens of reforms: body cameras, case review panels, anonymous reporting systems for both citizens and officers. But nothing has erased what happened. Sometimes I still wonder about those letters. Who was watching us all those years? Who knew what Garrett had done? Was it someone in the department? A relative of one of the victims? I'll probably never know. What haunts me most is not just that Garrett was a monster, but that he was right under my nose. I'd trusted him, looked up to him, never questioned his methods or his past cases. How many other victims were there that we don't know about? How many families are still waiting for answers? I still have a copy of each letter in a locked drawer in my desk. Sometimes late at night, I take them out and reread them, looking for clues I might have missed, wondering about the person who wrote them and why they waited so long to come forward. Every badge I've ever pinned on feels heavier now. Every cop I've ever trained, I wonder, did I miss something? Are they who they claim to be? The truth is, you never really know what someone is capable of, even the people sworn to protect you. Garrett's gone now. The case is closed, but I'll never sleep soundly again. Story 9. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 2 years now, and I still get cold sweats thinking about it. I need to get it off my chest because it's eating me up inside, and maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. Back in October of 2021, I decided to take a solo hiking trip in the Appalachians. I needed some time alone after my cousin Jake passed away unexpectedly. We used to hike together all the time growing up, and I thought being out in nature might help me feel connected to him again. I'd been planning this particular route for weeks, a 3-day trek along the Blackburn Ridge Trail in a more secluded part of the mountains. I'm an experienced hiker, so I wasn't worried about the difficulty. I just wanted the solitude. I arrived at the trailhead around 7 in the morning. The parking area was basically just a small gravel clearing at the end of a dirt road, and there was only one other vehicle there, a beat-up red pickup truck that looked like it had been through hell. The paint was peeling, and there was a large dent in the passenger door. Something about it immediately set me on edge, but I brushed it off. Probably just another hiker or maybe a hunter, though hunting season hadn't officially started yet. I remember checking my backpack one last time. Water, food, first aid kit, map, compass, knife, headlamp, the works. I even had my satellite phone in case of emergencies, since cell service is basically non-existent out there. After taking a deep breath of that crisp mountain air, I set off down the trail, feeling optimistic for the first time in months. The first few hours were peaceful. The leaves were changing, all those bright reds and yellows against the deep green of the pines. The trail was well marked, but not well traveled, which was exactly what I wanted. I passed a couple of small streams and took some photos of the landscape that Jake would have appreciated. Around noon, I stopped for lunch on a rocky outcrop with a view of the valley below. That's when I first got the feeling I was being watched. You know that sensation where the hair on the back of your neck stands up? I kept looking around, scanning the trees, but didn't see anything unusual. Just birds and the occasional rustling that was probably a squirrel. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I packed up and continued hiking, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. About an hour later, I noticed something strange. There was a faint path branching off from the main trail. It wasn't marked on my map, and there were no trail blazes, just a narrow opening between some rhododendron bushes where the undergrowth had been trampled down. My first instinct was to ignore it and keep going. But then I spotted what looked like a piece of fabric caught on one of the branches, bright blue, like a torn piece of a jacket or backpack. I'm still kicking myself for what I did next. Instead of continuing on the main trail, I decided to check out this unmarked path. I told myself I was just being thorough, making sure no hiker was in trouble. But honestly, I was curious, and that curiosity nearly got me killed. The side path was rough and clearly not maintained by the Park Service. It went steeply downhill, and I had to grab onto trees to keep from sliding in some spots. After about 15 minutes of careful descent, the path leveled out into a small clearing surrounded by thick forest. What I saw there made my blood run cold. There was a campsite, but not the kind you'd expect from hikers or campers. A large, green tarp was strung between trees, creating a crude shelter. Underneath it was a folding table covered with tools, hunting knives, hatchets, a handsaw, and several coils of rope. But what really disturbed me was the cage. Yes, an actual metal cage, big enough to hold a person, partially hidden under some brush at the edge of the clearing. Next to the table was a metal fire pit with charred remains inside, and beside that, a stack of plastic containers. I made the mistake of looking inside one that was open. It contained personal items, a watch, a wallet, some keys, and a woman's necklace. Different styles, like they belonged to different people. That's when I saw the restraints hanging from a nearby tree branch. They weren't animal traps, they were handcuffs and zip ties. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I wasn't looking at a hunter's camp. This was something much worse. I was so shocked I just stood there for what felt like forever, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard a twig snap somewhere in the forest behind me. I didn't wait to see who or what made that noise. I turned and ran back the way I came, scrambling up the steep path, branches whipping my face as I pushed through. I was breathing so hard my lungs burned, but all I could think was that I needed to get back to the main trail. Halfway up, I distinctly heard footsteps behind me, heavy boots moving quickly through the undergrowth. That's when pure terror kicked in. I veered off the path, hoping to lose whoever was following me, and crouched behind a fallen tree. As I tried to control my breathing, I heard the footsteps slow down. They were searching for me. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The footsteps eventually moved away, back down toward the camp. I took out my map with shaking hands and tried to figure out where I was. If I continued west through the forest, I should eventually hit the main trail, again, bypassing the point where the side path connected. Moving as quietly as possible, I started making my way through the dense forest, constantly checking behind me. Every sound made me freeze, a bird taking flight, a branch creaking in the wind. I've never been so afraid in my life. After about 45 minutes of slow, careful movement, I finally saw the main trail through the trees. I was about to rush toward it when I spotted a figure walking along it, a man wearing dark green clothing. For a second, I panicked, thinking it was whoever had been at that camp. Then I realized it was a park ranger. I've never been so relieved to see another human being. I called out and stumbled onto the trail, probably looking like a complete mess with scratches on my face and arms, leaves in my hair, and wild eyes. The ranger, his name tag said Collins, was immediately concerned. I tried to explain what I'd found, tripping over my words and probably making little sense. He got me to sit down, gave me some water, and radioed for backup. I remember him saying something like, "Possible crime scene discovered, requesting immediate assistance at marker 17 on Blackburn Ridge." While we waited for other rangers to arrive, I gave him more coherent directions to the campsite. He asked if I'd seen anyone, and I told him about the red pickup at the trailhead and the footsteps that had followed me. Ranger Collins looked grim and kept his hand near his sidearm the whole time we talked. About 30 minutes later, 2 more rangers arrived. One stayed with me, while Collins and the other went to investigate the site I'd described. They told me to wait until they returned, and we would all head back to the ranger station together. It was getting late in the afternoon by then, and I was anxious about being in the woods as darkness approached. The ranger who stayed with me, a woman named Martinez, tried to keep me calm by talking about casual things, but I could tell she was on high alert, constantly scanning our surroundings. Collins and the other ranger returned after about an hour, looking disturbed. They confirmed they'd found the campsite exactly as I'd described it. Collins radioed in again, this time calling for law enforcement to secure the scene. They decided we needed to get me out of there immediately. The 4 of us started hiking back toward the trailhead. No one spoke much, and the rangers positioned themselves around me, 1 in front, 2 behind, like they were expecting trouble. We reached the parking area just as the sun was setting. What I saw next made my stomach drop. My car was still there, but all 4 tires had been slashed, and the red pickup truck was gone. I nearly broke down then. The rangers immediately called for a police escort and arranged for my car to be towed once they got me safely away from there. While we waited in one of their vehicles with the doors locked, Martinez tried to get me to describe the truck in more detail, asking if I'd noticed a license plate or any distinguishing features. I hadn't. 2 police cars arrived about 45 minutes later, and I was driven to the nearest station to give a formal statement. They told me they would send officers to secure the campsite and investigate further. A detective interviewed me for hours, asking me to go over every detail multiple times. They took my hiking clothes for potential evidence and gave me some spare clothes to wear. I spent the night in a motel in town, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that campsite, those restraints hanging from the tree. The next morning, an officer drove me to get my car from the repair shop where it had been towed and followed me all the way home, 2 hours away. I later learned from the detective who called to follow up that they found evidence of at least 3 different people having been held at that site. They wouldn't give me specifics, but they thanked me for reporting it and potentially saving lives. It's been almost 2 years, and I still have nightmares about what happened. I'm seeing a therapist, which helps, but I haven't gone on a real hike since. The most I can manage is walking on popular trails near my home, always in broad daylight, always with other people around. I can't handle being alone in the woods anymore. The worst part is not knowing who was at that camp or if they knew who I was. Did they get my license plate before they left? Are they looking for me? Sometimes I think I see that red truck in my rearview mirror, and my heart stops until I realize it's just another pickup. The police never found whoever was responsible, at least not that they've told me. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there in those mountains, hunting people instead of animals. And sometimes, when I wake up from another nightmare, drenched in sweat, I can't shake the feeling that someday they might come hunting for me. Story 10. I've been a truck driver with Midwest Freight for just over 6 years now. It's a good job, decent pay, reasonable hours, and I'm home often enough to see my wife and kids. I've driven the I-70 corridor between Kansas City and St. Louis more times than I can count. October 15th, 2021 should have been just another routine haul. I wish to God it had been. It was raining that night, not a downpour, but that steady, miserable drizzle that never lets up. The kind that makes your wipers squeak when they're going too fast, but leaves streaks when they're going too slow. My rig was loaded with industrial parts, headed for a distribution center outside St. Louis. I'd done this exact run probably 100 times before. Around 11:30 at night, about 3 hours into my drive, my dispatch console pinged. This wasn't unusual. Dispatchers send updates, route changes, or check-ins all the time. What was weird was the sender, Dispatcher 7. In 6 years, I'd never seen that designation. We had 5 dispatchers at Midwest Freight, and they always used their names or employee numbers. The message was simple. Driver Chen, take exit 89 for alternate route, congestion ahead. I frowned at the console. Exit 89 was coming up in about 20 miles, but it wasn't a normal truck route. If I remembered right, it just led to some county roads and farmland. Plus, traffic was light. I could see maybe 4 other vehicles in my mirrors. Definitely no congestion. I ignored it and kept driving. 5 minutes later, another ping. Driver Chen, confirm receipt of routing instruction. Exit 89 required. I tapped the reply button. No congestion visible. Staying on I-70 as scheduled. The response came almost instantly. Not a request. Lives depend on your compliance. That sent a chill down my spine. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I picked up my phone and called our main dispatch number. It rang 7 times before someone answered. Dispatch, said a voice that didn't sound like any of our regular dispatchers. The voice was flat, almost monotone. This is Bobby Chen. Who am I speaking with? There was a long pause. I don't know. The voice sounded confused. What do you mean you don't know? Are you a dispatcher at Midwest Freight? I think so. I'm at a desk. There are screens. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. How long have you been working there? Another pause. I don't remember. I hung up. My heart was pounding. This had to be some kind of weird prank. Maybe the new guy was messing with me. I decided to ignore it and keep driving. My console pinged again. Driver Chen, Your call to dispatch has been logged as an irregularity. Take exit 89. Final warning. How the hell did they know I just called dispatch? I hadn't mentioned it in any messages. I switched off the console display and concentrated on the road. The rain was coming down harder now, and visibility was getting worse. I noticed something odd about the other trucks on the highway. There were 5 of them within view, all maintaining perfectly even spacing, all going exactly the speed limit. Not 1 mile over or under. In my experience, that never happens. I reached for my CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Midwest Freight 214 heading eastbound on I-70. Anybody else getting weird dispatch messages tonight? Come back. After a moment of static, a voice came through. This is Big Sky 370. Yeah, getting strange instructions from someone called Dispatcher 7. Told me to take exit 89 coming up. Never heard of them before. Another voice chimed in. JB Hunt 542 here. Same message, same exit. Anyone know what's at exit 89? This is Chen again. I'm not taking it. Something's not right. My console lit up again, even though I'd turned the display off. Driver Chen, we see you're using CB radio to communicate with other drivers. This violates protocol. Exit 89, now. I felt sick. How could they possibly know I was using the CB? There's no way the dispatch system could monitor that. I grabbed my phone and called my wife. She picked up on the second ring, but something was wrong. Her voice had the same flat quality as the person who'd answered at dispatch. Bobby, she said, without any of her usual warmth, you should follow your routing instructions. Lisa? What are you talking about? Did someone call you? Maintain the schedule, Bobby. Take exit 89. I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I tried calling my brother next. He answered with the exact same message. Follow routing instructions. Take exit 89. Exit 89 was now just 5 miles ahead. The signs for it reflected in my headlights. I decided I needed to stop somewhere, anywhere, to figure out what was happening. There was a truck stop about a mile ahead. I could pull in there, gather my thoughts, maybe talk to some other drivers in person. As I pulled into the truck stop, I noticed something immediately wrong. The parking lot was nearly full of semis, maybe 40 or 50 trucks, but there wasn't a single person visible. No one pumping gas, no one walking to or from the building. Just rows of trucks with their engines idling. I parked and sat in my cab for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down. The rain had stopped, but the air felt unnaturally still. No sounds except for the rumble of diesel engines. I walked toward the main building. Through the windows, I could see lights were on, but there didn't seem to be anyone inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The place was completely empty. No cashiers, no customers. The coffee pots were full, steam still rising from them. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a table, but no people. Then a phone rang, the landline behind the counter. I hesitated, then walked over and picked it up. Hello? Driver Chen. It was the same flat voice from my console. You've disrupted the schedule. Who is this? What the hell is going on? I am Dispatcher 7. You've broken the chain, Bobby. Your actions are affecting other drivers. What chain? What are you talking about? Look outside. I turned toward the windows. In the parking lot, where there had been only empty trucks moments before, now stood dozens of drivers. They were spaced evenly apart, standing perfectly still next to their vehicles. None of them were moving or speaking, just standing there, faces expressionless, looking toward the building. What did you do to them? I whispered into the phone. They followed instructions. They maintained the schedule. Exit 89 is still your destination, Bobby. The others are waiting for you to resume your place in the chain. I slammed the phone down and ran outside. As I approached the nearest driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s, I could see his eyes were open and alert. He was conscious, aware, but completely immobile. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" I asked, waving my hand in front of his face. His eyes flickered to mine, and I saw pure terror in them. His mouth moved slightly, but no sound came out. It was like he was frozen in place by some invisible force. I ran to another driver, then another, all the same, conscious but unable to move or speak. Some had tears running down their faces. One was mouthing what looked like "help us" over and over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from unknown. "Return to your vehicle and proceed to exit 89. The others cannot move until you comply." I looked around at the frozen drivers, their pleading eyes. What choice did I have? I ran back to my truck, climbed in, and started the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I checked my mirrors. The drivers were all walking back to their trucks in perfect unison, like soldiers marching. Exit 89 was now just 2 miles ahead. My console pinged again. "Correct decision, Driver Chen. Maintain current speed and heading." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. What was waiting for me at exit 89? What happened to those other drivers? I thought about trying to call the police, but after what happened with my wife and brother, I was afraid of who might answer. The exit appeared ahead, a simple ramp leading off into darkness. No streetlights, no signs indicating what was down there, just a plain exit 89 marker. As I approached, I saw other trucks taking the exit, a steady stream of them, all maintaining the same exact speed and distance from each other. I put on my signal and followed them down the ramp. The road narrowed from highway to a 2-lane country road, winding between dark fields. But something strange happened as I drove. The road gradually widened again. The pavement became newer, smoother. After about 5 miles, I was driving on what looked like a brand new 6-lane highway, one that I was certain didn't exist on any map. Other trucks surrounded me now, hundreds of them, all moving in perfect synchronization. No one was using their CB. No one flashed their lights or honked. Just an endless convoy of trucks moving through the night on a highway that shouldn't exist. My console lit up one last time. "Welcome to the network, Driver Chen. You are now part of the chain. Maintain your position." That was 7 months ago. I'm still driving. I haven't been home since. I haven't spoken to another human being except through carefully monitored messages. I don't know what I'm hauling anymore. The manifests are just strings of numbers and codes that make no sense. Sometimes we deliver to normal-looking warehouses. Other times, we drop trailers in the middle of nowhere, and they're gone when we return. There are thousands of us on these phantom highways. We all took exit 89, or exits like it, all across the country. We follow the instructions of Dispatcher 7 without question now. We maintain the schedule. We keep the chain intact. I think we're moving things that aren't supposed to exist, following routes that aren't on any map, serving some purpose none of us understand. There's a shadow transportation network operating right alongside the regular one, and no one on the outside has any idea it exists. I'm writing this because sometimes, for brief moments, the monitoring system glitches. Right now, Dispatcher 7 thinks I'm sleeping in my cab. I don't know how long this window will last. If you're reading this and you're a truck driver, beware of unknown dispatcher designations. Ignore routing instructions that don't make sense. And whatever you do, never take exit 89. I don't think I'll ever get home again. I don't think any of us will. We're part of the chain now. Story 11. I've been wanting to get this off my chest for years now. I've never told the full story to anyone except my therapist, and even then I left out certain details because I was afraid she'd think I was having a psychotic break. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, convinced there's something watching me from just outside my window. But I need to tell someone what happened back in Crawford County, even if no one believes me. It was November 17th, 2007. I remember because it was the day after my 34th birthday. I'd been a deputy with the Crawford County Sheriff's Department for almost 8 years, and Sheriff Blackwood had just promoted me to senior deputy the month before. Ethan Blackwood was a good man, methodical, rational, the kind of boss who took everything seriously but never panicked. That's what makes what happened to him all the worse. That morning started like any other. I was at my desk catching up on paperwork when dispatch called in a complaint from Martha Jennings. Martha was in her 80s, lived alone on the outskirts of town in that old farmhouse that had been in her family for generations. She wasn't the type to call in for nothing. Most folks around here handled their own problems. Sheriff Blackwood decided to check it out himself and asked me to ride along. When we pulled up to Martha's place, she was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan despite the mild weather. Her hands were shaking when she offered us coffee, which I declined, but Blackwood accepted. That was his way. Take the coffee, let them talk. It's been standing there since dawn, she told us, pointing toward the tree line behind her property. Just standing there, watching the house. At first I didn't see anything. The tree line was about 200 yards from the back of her house, where the cleared farmland met the forest. But then Blackwood nudged me and pointed. That's when I saw it. There was a figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall, maybe 7 feet or more. Even from that distance, something about its proportions was just wrong. Its arms seemed too long for its body, hanging down almost to where knees would be. It was dark, not like a shadow exactly, but like it was wearing something that absorbed the light around it. Has it moved at all? Blackwood asked Martha. Not an inch, she said. Just stands there, watching. Blackwood pulled out his binoculars from the cruiser and studied the figure for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but I noticed his knuckles whiten as he gripped the binoculars tighter. Lisa, he said, using my first name, which was unusual for him on duty. Do you see a face on that thing? I borrowed the binoculars and looked. What I saw still haunts me. Where a face should have been was just blank. Not covered, not shadowed, just absent of features. Like looking at the back of someone's head, except it was clearly facing us. We should check it out, I said, trying to sound professional despite the chill spreading through me. Blackwood nodded and told Martha to stay inside and lock her doors. We approached the figure slowly, walking across the open field. I had my hand on my holster the whole time. About halfway across the field, the figure moved for the first time. It tilted. That's the only way I can describe it. Not like a person leaning, but like a board being tilted at an angle. Its body remained rigid, but it tilted at least 45 degrees to the side, an angle that would make any normal person fall over. And then it just glided backward into the trees, not running, not walking. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, moving faster than anything human possibly could. We broke into a run, reaching the spot where it had stood. What we found was a perfect circle of disturbed earth, about 6 feet in diameter. The ground inside the circle looked like it had been gently stirred, like someone had run a rake through the top layer of soil and dead leaves. But there were no footprints leading to or from the circle. None. Not even where we'd clearly seen the figure standing. What the hell was that? I remember asking. Blackwood didn't answer. He was crouched down, examining the circle with an intensity I'd never seen from him before. "Take pictures of this," he finally said. "Document everything." I did as he asked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from deeper in the woods. When we returned to Martha's house, she seemed relieved, but not surprised by our findings. She just nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "The Johnsons down the road saw it last week," she told us, "standing at their property line for hours. They didn't report it because they thought no one would believe them." That was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, we received 11 more reports of sightings. Different locations across the county, but always the same description. Unnaturally tall figure, 2 long arms, no face, standing motionless for hours before disappearing. And always, we'd find that same circle of disturbed earth. People started calling it the Crawford Watchman, a name I hated because it made the thing sound almost benevolent, like some kind of guardian. There was nothing benevolent about it. Then Martha Jennings died. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, heart failure. She was elderly, lived alone. These things happen. Except when we went through her house, we found every window blind closed from the inside, every single one. And on her bedside table was a perfect circle of small objects, buttons, coins, a couple of pebbles from her garden. The circle was about 8 inches in diameter. I remember standing in her bedroom, looking at that circle of objects and feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Blackwood saw it too, but neither of us said anything about it in our official report. What could we say? 3 more elderly residents died over the next month. All had previously reported seeing the watchman. All died of apparently natural causes: stroke, heart attack, aneurysm. And in every house, we found the blinds drawn and a circle of small objects somewhere near the body. The county brought in a criminal psychologist from the State University, Dr. Catherine Chen. She was smart, thorough, but ultimately useless. She suggested mass psychogenic illness, basically that one person reported seeing something strange, and then the power of suggestion made others think they saw it too. Collective anxiety, she called it. "But how do you explain the circles?" I asked her. "Both on the ground where the figure stands and the arrangements found near the victims." "Copycat behavior," she said, with the confidence of someone who hasn't actually seen what we'd seen. "Someone is perpetuating the myth, perhaps unconsciously." "And the deceased victims?" Blackwood pressed. "How did they arrange objects beside themselves after suffering catastrophic medical events?" She had no answer for that. One night, about a month after the first sighting, Blackwood called me to his office. He had a map of the county spread out on his desk, with each sighting marked with a red pin, dated in chronological order. "Do you see it?" he asked. I looked at the pattern and felt my stomach drop. The sightings formed a spiral, gradually moving inward toward Millfield, the county seat, toward where most of us lived, toward where Blackwood lived alone in that old house at the end of Maple Street. "It's mapping something," he said quietly. "Or hunting." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? That I believed a faceless entity was systematically working its way through our county? That somehow it was connected to the deaths of 4 elderly residents? It sounded insane. 2 days later, Blackwood called me at 3 in the morning. "It's here," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "In my backyard. It's watching me." I drove to his house in record time, calling in 2 other deputies for backup. When I arrived, Blackwood was standing at his kitchen window, the lights off in the house, peering through a gap in the blinds. "It's tracking my movements," he whispered when I entered. When I go to the living room, it shifts position to keep watching through those windows. When I come back here, it moves again. I looked through the gap in the blinds. There it was, at the edge of his property where the yard met the woods. Taller than I remembered, its proportions even more wrong up close. It stood perfectly still, but somehow I could feel its attention fixed directly on us. "I'm going to circle around behind it," Blackwood said, grabbing his service weapon and flashlight. "Ethan, wait," I said, forgetting protocol in my fear. "Let's wait for backup." But he was already heading out the side door. I watched from the window as he disappeared around the side of the house. Minutes passed. I kept my eyes fixed on the figure, which hadn't moved. Then I saw the beam of Blackwood's flashlight cutting through the trees behind it. For just a second, the light illuminated the figure from behind. What I saw in that brief moment of illumination has haunted my nightmares ever since. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a solid thing. It was like something wearing the rough shape of a man, like an ill-fitting suit. The light didn't shine on it so much as through parts of it, revealing a form that seemed to be constantly shifting and settling, like dust motes in a sunbeam trying to hold a shape. Then it was gone. Not running, not walking, just there 1 second and gone the next. Blackwood's flashlight beam swept back and forth frantically before he emerged from the trees, pale and shaken. When backup arrived, we searched the woods and found another circle, identical to the others except for one detail. This one contained a fine powder scattered throughout the disturbed soil. We collected samples, and the lab later identified it as a mixture of human ashes and local clay. Blackwood became obsessed after that night. He dug into historical records, consulted with anthropologists from the university, interviewed the oldest residents of the county. He developed a theory that the watchman was somehow connected to old Shawnee burial practices. There had been construction at the edge of the county that spring, disturbing what might have been an unmarked burial ground. His theory was that the watchman was some kind of territorial sentinel awakened by the disturbance. Dr. Chen recommended Blackwood take medical leave. He refused. 2 weeks later, he disappeared from his home. When we entered his house, we found maps spread across his dining room table, historical documents pinned to the walls, red string connecting them. Classic signs of a mind unraveling, Dr. Chen said, but I knew better. The pattern on his map had been completed, a perfect spiral with his house at the center. We organized search teams, combed the woods for days. On the third day, we found a clearing about 2 miles into the forest. A perfect circle, just like the others but larger, about 15 feet across. Blackwood's flashlight lay in the center, still on, illuminating a circular arrangement of river stones. Blackwood himself was never found. The official report attributed the watchman's sightings to trespassers, wildlife misidentifications, and mass hysteria. The deaths were ruled natural causes, the circles of objects dismissed as coincidence or the behavior of confused elderly people in their final moments. I became interim sheriff and later was elected to the position permanently. One of my first acts was to institute a policy requiring all deputies to document and investigate any reported clearing found in the woods. When a new deputy asked me why, I told him that some patterns aren't meant to be completed. I still live in Crawford County. Sometimes on nights when I can't sleep, I stand at my kitchen window and look out at the tree line behind my property. I keep my blinds open, always, and I keep a circle of small stones on my nightstand, not arranged in a circle, but scattered randomly, just in case. Because sometimes, even now, residents still report sightings of an unusually tall figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching. and sometimes I think I see it too. Story 12. I don't usually share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. I've been the sheriff of Creston County, Montana for almost 2 decades now, and I thought I'd seen it all. Domestic disputes, drunk drivers, even the occasional armed standoff. But what happened last February changed me forever. It was during that massive blizzard that hit us on February 12th, 2018. You might have seen it on the news. We got nearly 3 feet of snow in under 24 hours. I was pulling a double shift because half my deputies couldn't make it in. The roads were absolute hell, visibility down to maybe 15 feet in some spots. Around 9:30 that night, I got a call from dispatch about a motorist who reported seeing headlights veering off Route 12 near the old Blackwood property. Normally, I would have sent a deputy, but with the weather and short staffing, I decided to handle it myself. That decision still haunts me. The Blackwood place had been abandoned for years, this old farmhouse about 2 miles off the main road. Local kids used to dare each other to spend the night there until we put up no trespassing signs. Hadn't been out there myself in at least 5 years. I remember the drive vividly, my wipers barely keeping up with the snow, the cruiser sliding even with chains on. When I got to where the motorist reported seeing the car go off-road, I could just barely make out tire tracks disappearing into the tree line. My gut told me to wait for backup, but if someone was hurt out there in this cold, they wouldn't last long. I followed the tracks in my cruiser as far as I could, then continued on foot with just my flashlight. About half a mile in, I found a silver sedan crashed against a pine tree. The airbags had deployed, but there was no driver. The engine was still warm, so whoever had been driving hadn't been gone long. That's when I noticed the footprints leading away from the car, uneven, like someone was limping or injured. They headed toward the old Blackwood house, which I could just make out through the falling snow. As I got closer, I swear my blood went cold, and it had nothing to do with the blizzard. There was a light flickering in one of the upstairs windows. Just a faint glow, but definitely there. I called in my location to dispatch, letting them know I was checking for injured persons at the Blackwood property. The radio crackled with static, but I managed to get through. Dispatch ran the plates on the sedan. It belonged to a Daniel Morrow, reported missing 3 weeks earlier from Billings, about 200 miles away. That didn't make any sense. The car was still warm, like it had just crashed. The front door of the farmhouse was ajar. When I pushed it open, my flashlight revealed multiple sets of footprints in the dust of the entryway. Some fresh, others days old. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Someone had been coming and going from this place. I should have waited for backup. That's protocol. That's what I've always told my deputies. But I was worried about that injured driver, and honestly, I was curious about that light upstairs. 23 years on the job, and I still made a rookie mistake. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed toward that flickering light. My hand stayed on my holstered weapon the entire time. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow, with peeling wallpaper and the smell of mold. 4 doors lined the hall, all closed except for the last one on the right, the source of the light. I approached, slowly, announcing myself as law enforcement. No response. When I finally pushed the door open, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing at first. The room was mostly empty, except for a wooden chair in the center, surrounded by maybe 15 or 20 candles, the source of the flickering light. On a small table next to the chair sat a police scanner, quietly broadcasting our patrol updates. But it was the walls that made my stomach drop. They were covered, and I mean covered, with photographs, hundreds of them. As I moved closer, I realized with growing horror that most of them were of me. Me getting coffee at Darlene's diner, me walking to my cruiser, me at the grocery store, me mowing my lawn. There was even one of me sleeping, clearly taken through my bedroom window. Other photos showed local residents with their faces circled in red. With a sick feeling, I recognized several people from missing persons reports we'd filed over the last year. A county map hung on one wall, marked with what looked like dried blood. The Blackwood property was circled multiple times. I was so focused on the photos that I didn't hear him approach. The blow to the back of my head sent me sprawling. My flashlight clattered across the floor, spinning and illuminating glimpses of the room in strobe-like flashes. I reached for my gun, but a boot stomped on my wrist, pinning it to the floor. "Hello, Sheriff Harland. Been waiting a long time for this." Even dazed, I recognized that voice immediately. Carter Walsh, a former deputy I'd fired 3 years ago for excessive force during an arrest. He'd beaten a DUI suspect so badly the man needed facial reconstruction surgery. Walsh had threatened me during his termination, but I'd written it off as the anger of the moment. As my vision cleared, I could see him standing over me, grinning. He looked terrible, gaunt, with a wild beard and dirty clothes. But his eyes were what frightened me most, completely lucid and burning with hatred. "Like my collection?" He gestured to the walls. "Been documenting your life while planning how to end it. Learned all your patterns, your habits. Know when you sleep, when you eat." He chuckled. "Even know you still sleep with a nightlight, tough guy." I tried to stay calm, keep him talking. "The missing persons, was that you, Carter?" His smile widened. "You never were a good detective, Bob. Always too busy playing the hero. Never noticed what was happening right under your nose." He moved toward a corner and dragged something heavy across the floor. A duffel bag. When he unzipped it, I saw rope, duct tape, and several knives. "That car downstairs, Daniel Morrow. What happened to him?" I asked, trying to buy time while looking for an opening. Walsh laughed. "Daniel's been gone for weeks. Found his ID in his wallet. Kept his car, though, figuring it would come in handy." He tapped the police scanner. "Heard you were on shift alone tonight. Knew with the blizzard you'd respond personally to an accident on Route 12. You're so predictable." My mind was racing. The car had been a trap. He'd deliberately crashed it to lure me here, knowing I'd follow protocol and check for injured drivers. "The others, are they here?" I asked, dreading the answer. Walsh shook his head. "Storm cellar's getting full, but there's room for one more." He pulled out a hunting knife. "You know, I've imagined this moment every day for 3 years. How you'd beg, how you'd—" I saw my chance when he started monologuing. I kicked out hard, catching him in the knee. He howled and stumbled back. I scrambled for anything I could use as a weapon and grabbed a heavy brass candlestick. When he lunged at me with the knife, I swung with everything I had, connecting with the side of his head. The blow stunned him long enough for me to retrieve my gun. Walsh saw me aiming and charged anyway, knife raised. I fired twice. The sound was deafening in that small room. Walsh collapsed at my feet, the knife clattering beside him. I didn't check if he was alive. I just backed away, gun still trained on him, and called dispatch with shaking hands. It took backup almost an hour to reach us through the blizzard. By then, Walsh was dead, and I was sitting in the hallway, unable to stay in that room with all those photos of me, of my life. The investigation that followed revealed the full horror. Walsh had been living periodically in the farmhouse's storm cellar, which he'd converted into some kind of twisted workshop. We found evidence linking him to 7 disappearances across 3 counties. personal items belonging to missing persons, journals detailing his plans for me, sketches of torture devices. The most disturbing part was how methodically he'd stalked me. He had notes on my daily routine, the schedule of my patrols, even what I ordered at restaurants. For 3 years, he'd been watching me, studying me, while I remained completely oblivious. It's been 8 months since that night. I still serve as sheriff, but I don't respond to calls alone anymore. I've moved to a new house with a security system. I keep the blinds closed at night. Every February, I visit the families of Walsh's victims. I owe them that much. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about how long he watched me, how many times he might have been just outside my window or in the shadows behind me at a gas station. How close he came to making me another photo on that wall, another victim in that cellar. The worst part? I'll never know if I got them all, if there were others working with him, or if someone else out there was inspired by what he did. All I know is that I'll never again take for granted what might be lurking just beyond my flashlight beam. Story 13. I'm still having a hard time writing this, even after 3 months. The nightmares haven't stopped, and I've been sleeping with all my electronics unplugged. I know how crazy that sounds, but if you'd heard what I heard, you'd do the same. It started back in March of 2011 when I was called to a scene at Echo Lake. I'm Sheriff Dwayne Fletcher of Lakewood County, Oregon. Been in law enforcement for 22 years, and I've seen my share of ugliness, but nothing prepared me for Martin Walsh's workshop. Walsh was a local guy, 38, electrical engineer who worked remotely for some tech company in Seattle. Smart as hell, but kept to himself. His place was this small cabin on the north side of Echo Lake with a detached workshop where he tinkered with his projects. The call came in from his sister after he missed their weekly phone call and wasn't responding to messages. When I arrived, everything looked normal from the outside. No signs of forced entry. His truck was parked out front. But the moment I stepped into that workshop, I knew something was wrong. The smell hit me first, that unmistakable burnt meat smell that stays with you. Walsh was on the floor near his workbench, one hand still gripping what looked like a modified ham radio. His other arm was stretched out, fingers curled like claws. The burns on his hands and exit wound on his foot made it look like a straightforward electrocution. My deputy, Sarah Chen, started photographing the scene while I looked around. The workshop was meticulously organized. Tools hanging in perfect rows, components sorted in labeled bins. The workbench had this elaborate setup of radio equipment, oscilloscopes, and recording devices. Nothing seemed out of place except for a small notebook partially hidden under the bench. That notebook changed everything. It was Walsh's journal, filled with detailed notes about something he called anomalous audio phenomena at Echo Lake. The entries started about 2 months earlier, in January. The first few pages were technical stuff about frequencies and electromagnetic fields, but then they got weird. Walsh wrote about capturing voices through his equipment, voices that shouldn't be there. February 12th, third night of testing, signal strongest between 2:15 and 3:40 a.m. Voice clearer tonight, male, middle-aged, repeating numbers that sound like coordinates. February 26th, voice responding to my questions now, asked who it was. Response unclear, but contained the word buried. The final entry was dated the day before we found him. Voice coming through even when the equipment is unplugged. It knows my name. I've dealt with enough mentally unstable people to recognize paranoia, but Walsh's notes were methodical, precise, not the ramblings of someone losing his grip. And something about that last entry made the hair on my neck stand up. I called the medical examiner, Dr. Patel, to come take a look. While waiting, I had Sarah bag the journal and start collecting Walsh's recordings. The workshop had dozens of labeled tapes and several external hard drives. Dr. Patel arrived about an hour later. After her initial examination, she pulled me aside with a concerned look. "This doesn't add up, Duane," she said, pointing to marks on Walsh's wrists and ankles. "These are consistent with restraints, and the burn pattern suggests the current entered through both hands simultaneously." "You're saying this wasn't an accident," I said. "I'm saying someone held him down and made it look like one." We sealed off the scene and called in the state crime lab. I needed to know more about Walsh and what he was working on. We took all his equipment and recordings back to the station. That afternoon, I interviewed his elderly neighbor, Helen Maddox. She'd lived on Echo Lake since the 60s and knew everyone's business. "Martin was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly," she told me, hands wrapped around the mug of coffee I'd given her. "Started acting different about 2 months ago, coming over asking questions about the old days, especially about that radio tower they built back in '71. "What? Radio tower?" I asked. "Oh, the government put up a small tower on the North Shore. Said they were studying the lake or some such nonsense. Only lasted a few months before they packed up and left without a word." Helen explained that Walsh had become obsessed with the tower after finding old survey markers while expanding his workshop. He'd asked if anything strange had happened around that time. I told him about those 3 young men who went missing that spring. Hikers, I think. Never found them. She leaned forward. "You know, Sheriff, the day after I told Martin about those missing men, I saw him down by the lake with some kind of metal detector. He was so excited when he came back, said he'd found something important." After Helen left, I went through county records and confirmed her story. The U.S. Geological Survey had indeed established a monitoring station at Echo Lake in January 1971 to study what they called subsurface electromagnetic anomalies. The project was terminated in April, with minimal documentation explaining why. I spent the rest of the day listening to Walsh's recordings. Most were just static or ambient lake sounds, but the files from the week before his death were different. In one labeled EL327, I heard it, a distorted but clearly human voice repeating, 40 years buried. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. In another recording, Walsh could be heard asking questions. "Who are you? What happened to you?" The responses were garbled, but one phrase came through clearly. "Find Leonard Harris." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Leonard Harris had been a deputy in this department long before my time. I'd seen his name in old case files when I first became sheriff. I stayed late that night, digging through archived reports. In early 1971, 3 men had disappeared near Echo Lake, college students on a weekend camping trip. Their car was found at the trailhead, but no trace of them was ever discovered. The lead investigator was Deputy Leonard Harris, who resigned shortly after the case went cold. Sarah found me asleep at my desk the next morning, surrounded by old files. She'd brought coffee and news. "I looked up Leonard Harris," she said. "He died in 1989, but his widow still lives just outside of town." We drove out to see Margaret Harris that morning. She was in her 70s now, but sharp as a tack. When I mentioned Echo Lake, her whole demeanor changed. "Leonard was never the same after that case," she said quietly. "Had night terrors for years. Would wake up screaming about voices coming from the water." She got up and went to a bookshelf, returning with a small lockbox. "Before he died, he made me promise never to go near Echo Lake and to give this to anyone who came asking about those missing boys." Inside was a journal similar to Walsh's, containing Harris's unofficial notes on the investigation. He wrote about interviewing workers from the USGS station who were unusually evasive. One entry described how his radio would pick up strange voices whenever he drove near the lake at night. The final pages documented his growing paranoia that he was being followed by government agents. I thanked Margaret and promised to let her know what we found. Back at the station, I pulled up modern geological surveys of the area. Using mapping software, we discovered something interesting. Walsh's workshop sat directly above a natural underground cavity that was partially filled with water, connected to Echo Lake through subterranean channels. According to a note from the software, this type of formation could potentially act as a natural amplifier for certain frequencies. It took nearly a week of calls to track down anyone from the original USGS team. Most were dead or couldn't be located. Finally, we found Dr. Stephen Merritt, a geophysicist now teaching at a university in Colorado. When I called him, he agreed to speak with me, but insisted on meeting in person. Merritt arrived in Lakewood 2 days later. He was in his 70s, distinguished looking with a neatly trimmed white beard. We met at the station, and I laid out everything we'd found: Walsh's recordings, the underground cavity, Harris's notes. "Sheriff," he said after listening silently, "what I'm about to tell you was classified information. I suppose after 40 years, it doesn't matter anymore." He took a deep breath. The Echo Lake project wasn't a USGS operation. It was a Navy intelligence project disguised as geological research. We were developing technology to detect submarine communications using natural geological formations as amplifiers. "What happened to those 3 hikers?" I asked. Merritt's face went pale. "They stumbled onto our operation. It was supposed to be remote enough that no one would find us, but they were off trail and saw things they shouldn't have. There was a confrontation with security personnel. It got out of hand." "You killed them," Sarah said flatly. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Afterward, we buried them under the tower foundation and reported them missing." His hands were shaking now. "We abandoned the site weeks later when our equipment started picking up voices we couldn't explain. The lake's geology created some kind of acoustic phenomenon we didn't understand." "And Walsh?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "When I heard about an engineer experimenting with radio equipment at Echo Lake, I got worried. I went to talk to him, convince him to stop. He showed me his recordings. He'd found the same frequency we had back then. Said he could hear the victims speaking." Merritt looked down. When he mentioned going public with what he'd found, I panicked. I placed Merritt under arrest that day. With his confession and the evidence we'd gathered, the case was solid. We got a warrant to excavate the old tower site and found human remains exactly where Merritt said they'd be. DNA matching identified them as the 3 missing students. Merritt was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Martin Walsh and as an accessory to the 3 1971 murders. The families of those boys finally got closure after 40 years of wondering. Science gave us answers for most of what happened. Echo Lake's unusual acoustic properties could amplify and distort sounds in ways that might seem supernatural. The underground water cavity beneath Walsh's workshop created a perfect conduit for these sounds. But there's one thing I can't explain. The night after we made the arrests, I went back to Walsh's workshop alone. I'm not sure why, maybe to get closure. I found one of his devices still in evidence bags, a simple receiver he'd built. Out of curiosity, I plugged it in. For several minutes, there was nothing but static. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., a voice came through, clear as day, not distorted like on the recordings. "Thank you, Sheriff Fletcher," it said. Then silence. I've told myself 1,000 rational explanations for what I heard. Maybe it was another officer playing a prank, or a stray radio signal, or my tired brain hearing what it wanted to hear. But deep down, I know it was real. I keep thinking about Walsh's final journal entry. Voice coming through even when the equipment is unplugged. Tonight, I'm going back to Echo Lake with a recorder of my own. I need to know if they're still there, still trying to speak from somewhere between this world and whatever comes after. Some questions don't let you rest until you find answers, even when you're afraid of what those answers might be. Story 14. I don't talk about this much. It's been 22 years now, but my hands still shake when I remember. Sometimes I wake up at night feeling the sun on my skin, thinking I'm back there in that hell. I need to write this down, though. Maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe it'll finally help me. I was 23 when I left Veracruz. I had a wife who was pregnant with our first child, and I couldn't find work that paid enough to support them. My cousin Miguel had made it to Phoenix the year before and said he could get me construction work that paid more in a week than I made in a month at home. It seemed like the only choice. There were 26 of us who paid the coyotes, $1,800 each. My entire savings plus money borrowed from my uncle. The coyotes promised it would be easy. 2 days walking, they said. You'll be in Phoenix by Sunday, working on Monday. They told us to bring only 1 gallon of water each because there are water stations along the way, and it's not that hot in May. Those lies cost 14 men their lives. Our guide was named Jesus. I remember thinking that was a good sign. He couldn't have been more than 20 years old, just a kid with a cheap GPS and a cell phone. Later we found out he had never even made the crossing himself. The coyotes had just given him a map and sent him with us. They dropped us off on May 19, 2001, around 3 in the morning. The air was cool then, almost comfortable. We all felt hopeful, excited even. We had no idea we were already in the wrong place. Jesus was supposed to take us on a route further west, but instead, we were walking straight into what I later learned was called El Camino del Diablo, the Devil's Highway. The first day wasn't so bad. We walked all morning as the sun rose. By noon it was getting hot, but we still had our water. We rationed it carefully, just small sips. Around sunset, we rested in the shadow of some rocks. Everyone was tired, but still optimistic. Jesus checked his GPS and frowned, but told us everything was fine. We slept for a few hours, and then continued walking through the night when it was cooler. By the second day, I started to worry. The terrain didn't match what Jesus had described. There were no landmarks he recognized. We should have reached a highway by now, but there was nothing but endless desert. The sun was brutal, easily over 100 degrees. My gallon of water was half gone. Others had already finished theirs. That's when the argument started. "Where are we? This isn't right," said Carlos, a guy around my age who had left behind 2 small daughters. "We're fine," Jesus insisted, but his voice shook. "It's just taking longer than expected." By afternoon, 3 men had no water left. We started sharing, but there wasn't enough. That night we couldn't sleep. The temperature barely dropped. We were all getting dehydrated. My lips were cracked and bleeding. My urine was dark yellow, almost brown. My head pounded with every heartbeat. The third day was when everything fell apart. The temperature must have been 110 degrees. The sun felt like it was cooking us alive. 4 men were showing serious signs of dehydration, confusion, dizziness, not sweating anymore despite the heat. One man, Roberto, started vomiting. When you're already dehydrated, vomiting is a death sentence. "We need to find help," Jesus finally admitted. "I'll take 4 men and go ahead faster. We'll send back rescue." 5 of them left, Jesus and 4 of the strongest men. They took what little water remained with the promise they'd send help quickly. The rest of us waited, finding what shade we could under scattered bushes and rocks. That's when the real horror began. Within hours, Roberto stopped responding when we talked to him. His skin was hot and completely dry. Another man, I think his name was Eduardo, started hallucinating. He kept saying he could see his mother cooking dinner just over the next hill. He wandered off before anyone could stop him. We never saw him again. I was sitting with my back against a rock when I noticed several men digging shallow holes in the ground with their hands. I didn't understand why until later. It's an instinctive thing people do when they're dying of heat. They try to bury themselves. The pain was unbelievable. First came the cramps, my calves and thighs seizing up like someone was twisting them with pliers. Then nausea, so bad I was dry heaving because there was nothing in my stomach to throw up. My tongue was swollen, and my throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. By evening, more men started wandering off. Some were hallucinating, seeing water that wasn't there. Others just seemed to give up and walk away to die alone. I remember one man, Pedro, I think, took off all his clothes. His mind was gone by then. He kept saying he was swimming in cool water. He died a few hours later, completely naked, his skin blistered and red. I stayed with a small group, maybe 7 or 8 guys. We huddled together as night fell, sharing body heat because the temperature dropped suddenly. It's strange how the desert can be so hot during the day and then so cold at night. Some of the men were praying, others were crying. I kept thinking about my wife and our unborn baby, wondering if I'd ever see them. That night, I watched 3 men die. One just stopped breathing next to me. Another had seizures, his body convulsing in the dirt before going still. The third wandered off in the middle of the night, mumbling about finding water. We were too weak to stop him. By morning of the 4th day, I couldn't stand up anymore. My kidneys felt like they were filled with broken glass. My eyes were so dry it hurt to blink. I was beyond thirst. My body had given up asking for water. I was just waiting to die. That's when I saw him, a man in a uniform. At first, I thought it was another hallucination. He was shouting something in English. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. I waved my arm weakly, and he saw me. More men in uniforms appeared. Border Patrol. They put me on a stretcher and lifted me into a helicopter. I later learned that 3 men from the advance group had managed to find Border Patrol agents. Jesus had abandoned them, running off to save himself. Those 3 survivors triggered a massive search and rescue operation. The scene they described finding was like something from a nightmare. Bodies scattered across miles of desert. Men in various stages of death. Some still alive, but barely. They found one man clutching a photo of his family, his body already stiff. Another had a religious medal melted into his palm from the heat. Some had torn off their clothes in the final stages of heat madness. Others had crawled under bushes seeking shade that never came. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. My kidneys nearly failed. I had second-degree burns on my face and arms from the sun. The psychological trauma was worse. 12 of us survived out of 26. 14 men died horrible deaths in that desert. It's been 22 years, and I still can't look at open spaces without panicking. I still wake up gasping, thinking I'm back there. I can't go to the beach or be anywhere hot for too long. My wife says I scream in my sleep sometimes. I did eventually make it to Phoenix. The Border Patrol turned me over to immigration. and I was given temporary protected status as a witness against the coyotes. I testified at their trial. 2 of them got 15 years in prison. It didn't bring back the 14 men who died. What haunts me most isn't just the physical suffering. It's the knowledge of how quickly we broke down, how fast we went from hopeful men with dreams to desperate animals dying in the dirt. In just 4 days, I remember men drinking their own urine. I remember the smell of bodies cooking in the sun. I remember the flies gathering on Roberto's open eyes when he stopped blinking. Sometimes when it's really hot, I feel phantom sensations, like my skin is burning all over again. My doctor calls it PTSD. All I know is that part of me never left that desert. I still see their faces. I still hear their prayers and cries for help. I still feel that thirst. A thirst so powerful it makes you understand. You're nothing but a bag of water wrapped in skin, and when that water's gone, so are you. The devil's highway, that's what they call it. Now I understand why. It wasn't just the heat or the terrain that was trying to kill us. That place felt malevolent, like it wanted us to suffer, like it enjoyed watching us die slowly, one by one. I never found out what happened to Jesus, the coyote guide who left us to die. Sometimes I imagine him still out there, wandering the desert, eternally lost and thirsty. Other times I imagine him living comfortably somewhere, having moved on to another job, another life, with no thought for the 14 souls he led to their deaths. I don't know why I survived when others didn't. I wasn't stronger or smarter, maybe just luckier. Maybe God wasn't finished with me yet. All I know is that crossing changed me forever. The desert took something from me I can never get back. If you're thinking of crossing, don't. Find another way. That desert doesn't care about your dreams or your family or your desperation. It will kill you without a thought, and your body will just be one more forgotten under that merciless sun. To this day, when I drink water, I say a silent prayer of thanks, and I think of those who died with their tongues swollen in their mouths, begging for just one more drop that never came. Story 15. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need to get it off my chest. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the sounds of shovels hitting dirt. My name is Dale Reed, Sheriff of Pinecrest, Idaho, population 3,700, or at least I was sheriff until last month when I finally handed in my badge. Couldn't take it anymore after everything that happened. It all started on September 12th, 2018. I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday, and I'd promised to be home early. Just after lunch, I got a call from Mac Jenkins, one of the Forest Service guys who'd been marking trees for a controlled burn. His voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand him. "Sheriff, I think I found a body," he stammered, "about 6 miles out on the old logging road." 20 minutes later, I was standing next to Mac at the edge of a shallow depression in the ground. The recent rains had washed away some of the soil, exposing what was unmistakably a human hand. I sent Mac back to his truck while I called in my deputy, Sam Wilkins. "Don't touch anything," I told Mac, "and don't tell anyone about this yet." By evening, we'd carefully excavated enough to confirm it was a woman's body, probably in her 20s, buried for at least a couple years based on decomposition. What struck me immediately was how she'd been positioned, hands crossed over her chest, like she was at peace. Between her fingers was a small wooden carving of a pine tree, about 3 inches tall, intricately detailed. I called the state crime lab in Boise, and they sent a team the next morning. The medical examiner determined she'd been strangled, then carefully prepared for burial. No signs of sexual assault. The ME estimated she'd been in the ground about 2 years. 2 days later, we had an ID. Jessica Landon, 23, reported missing in July 2016 when her car broke down passing through Pinecrest. I remembered the case. We'd found her abandoned Honda on Route 16 with a blown head gasket. Search parties found nothing, and everyone assumed she'd hitched a ride out of town. Her parents had come from Oregon, put up flyers, made pleas on local TV. Eventually, they went home empty-handed. I had to make that awful call to tell them we'd found their daughter. "Did she suffer?" her mother asked through tears. I lied. "No, ma'am. It would have been quick." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the wooden pine tree bothered me. It wasn't just thrown in the grave. It had been deliberately placed in her hands, like an offering or a ritual. The next morning, I pulled every missing persons case within a 100-mile radius, going back 15 years. 5 women, all between 20 and 25, all reported missing while passing through our area. All without their vehicles, all in the summer months. None ever found. I called in favors with the state police to bring cadaver dogs. We returned to the site where Jessica had been found and expanded the search area. The dogs hit on spots approximately 20 yards apart, forming a perfect semicircle around a massive old-growth pine. My stomach dropped as we started digging. By the end of that day, we'd uncovered 4 more graves. Each woman had been buried the same way, hands crossed, a wooden pine tree between them. The ME confirmed they'd all been killed the same way too, manual strangulation. The oldest body had been there almost 10 years. That night, I was working late at the station when Deputy Wilkins brought in an envelope that had been left at the front desk. No postmark, no fingerprints. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed text. "Ask about the Woodsman's Festival of 1987 and why it stopped." I'd lived in Pinecrest my entire life and had never heard of any Woodsman's Festival. The next morning, I went to see Eleanor Palmer, our former town librarian. At 83, Eleanor had a mind sharper than most people half her age and knew every bit of town history. When I mentioned the Woodsman's Festival, the color drained from her face. "Where did you hear about that?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she set down her teacup. "It might be connected to our murder investigation," I said. "I need to know what it was." Eleanor looked around her living room like someone might be listening. "We don't talk about that anymore, Dale. It was a mistake." I showed her my badge. "Eleanor, 5 women are dead. Whatever you know could help." She closed her eyes for a long moment. It started in the 1940s as a lumber industry celebration, got bigger in the 70s and 80s. There was a parade, contests, but also a ceremony in the forest. They chose a forest bride each year, usually a young woman passing through town. They'd take her into the woods, have her marry the forest in a ceremony at the old grandfather pine. "What happened in 87? I pressed. "A girl named Marianne Schaefer, pretty thing, hitchhiking to Seattle." Eleanor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Something went wrong. The men came back without her. Sheriff Tanner, your predecessor's predecessor, he gathered the town council. They agreed to end the festival, never speak of it again." "Are you telling me they killed her?" I felt sick. I don't know exactly what happened, but Thomas Garrett might. He was just a boy then, 13 maybe, always following the men around. His father caught him watching from the trees that night, beat him something awful for it. Thomas Garrett. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Now in his 50s, Garrett owned the largest lumber supply business in the county, served on the town council, volunteered for search and rescue operations. Everyone knew Tom. "One more thing," Eleanor said as I got up to leave. Those wooden pine trees, the men used to carve them as part of the ceremony. They were supposed to be gifts for the forest. I drove straight back to the station and pulled Garrett's file. No criminal record. Divorced twice, no children, lived alone on 20 acres outside town. I wanted to rush out there immediately, but I knew I needed to do this right. I called the state police again, requesting surveillance on Garrett. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on Friday evening, the state police called. Garrett had loaded something heavy wrapped in a tarp into his truck and driven to a remote area of his property. They'd followed at a distance and observed him, digging. I authorized immediate intervention. When the team moved in, they found Garrett with a freshly dug grave and a young woman, bound but alive, in the back of his truck. Amber Reynolds, 22, a college student, reported missing that morning when she didn't show up for work at the gas station off the highway. We arrested Garrett without incident. He didn't resist, didn't say a word, just smiled faintly like he'd been expecting us. The search of his property revealed a hidden room beneath his workshop. Inside were personal items belonging to each victim. Jessica's bracelet, another victim's earrings, a third's necklace, 5 journals, one for each woman, detailing how he'd watched them, disabled their vehicles, offered them rides, and taken them to the forest. And a workbench with dozens of carved wooden pine trees in various stages of completion. The journals went back 10 years and contained something even more disturbing. After witnessing Marianne Schaefer's death in 1987, Garrett had been both traumatized and fascinated. As an adult, he began recreating what he'd seen, convinced he was continuing a tradition that connected him to the forest. "The forest needs brides," he wrote. "I am its servant." The investigation widened. Several elderly residents were implicated in covering up the 1987 incident. My own mentor, retired Sheriff Dawson, admitted he'd known something had happened but had been sworn to secrecy by his predecessor. "We thought it was just a one-time tragedy," he told me, not meeting my eyes. "We never imagined." Garrett was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He never showed remorse, maintaining until the end that he was performing a sacred duty. I stayed on as sheriff for another year, implementing reforms, trying to address the culture of silence that had allowed Garrett's crimes to continue undetected. But every day I walked through town, I saw people differently. The baker who'd given me free donuts my whole career, the teacher who'd taught me in 3rd grade, the barber who'd cut my hair for 20 years. I kept wondering what secrets they were keeping, what they knew. The worst part is, I still don't know if we got the whole truth. Garrett's journals only went back 10 years, but Eleanor's story placed the festival's origins in the 40s. How many other forest brides might be buried in our woods? How many other secrets is this town keeping? Last month I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something outside my window. When I looked out, I saw nothing, but in the morning I found a small wooden pine tree on my porch, perfect in every detail, freshly carved. I handed in my badge that day. Some nights I still hear the shovels. I still see Jessica Landon's hands crossed over her chest, that wooden pine tree between her fingers. I still think about Marianne Schaefer and wonder where she's buried. And I still look at the familiar faces of Pinecrest and wonder what lies behind their smiles. Story 16. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened in my old apartment building. It's been over 5 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never written this down before, but I need to get it off my chest. Back in 2018, I moved into Meridian Towers in downtown Seattle. I was excited about the move. I'd just landed a great job at a tech company, and this place was within walking distance of my office. The building was this massive 42-story tower from the 70s with this weird brutalist meets Art Deco vibe. Not exactly pretty, but it had character, you know? When I toured the place, the rental agent mentioned they'd renovated most of the units and common areas over the years. My apartment on the 31st floor was pretty nice. Updated kitchen, decent bathroom, and amazing views of the Sound. The rent was steep, but that's Seattle for you. The first red flag should have been the elevators. There were 3 of them in the main lobby, 2 modern ones with digital displays and touch panels, and this ancient freight elevator with brass buttons that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. The agent casually mentioned that the old elevator was mainly for maintenance and moving furniture, but residents could use it if needed. During my first week, I overheard some neighbors complaining about the elevators in the laundry room. This older woman was saying how she got on the elevator, pressed 15, but when she got out, everything was wrong. The hallway looked different. The apartment numbers didn't match up. She had to get back in and try again. Everyone laughed it off as her being confused or the building's weird numbering system. I didn't think much about it until about 3 months after moving in. I was coming home late on a Thursday after a grueling day at work. My arms were full of grocery bags, and I was exhausted. When the elevator arrived, I just stepped in without paying attention. It wasn't until the doors closed that I realized I was in the old freight elevator. The ride up was weirdly slow and jerky. The elevator made this deep mechanical groan that I'd never heard before. When it finally stopped and the doors opened, I stepped out and froze. This wasn't my floor. I mean, it was floor 31 according to the button I'd pressed, but everything looked wrong. Instead of the neutral beige walls and blue carpeting, I was looking at this dingy hallway with faded green carpet and institutional yellow walls that reminded me of a hospital. The lighting was dimmer, coming from these old fluorescent fixtures that buzzed loudly. The air smelled musty, like no one had been there in years. I stood there for a solid minute, completely confused, wondering if I'd somehow gotten off on the wrong floor. But the brass plate next to the elevator clearly said 31. I took a few tentative steps down the hallway, and that's when I noticed the apartment numbers were in a completely different sequence than on my regular floor. Feeling increasingly freaked out, I got back into the elevator, hit the lobby button, rode down, then immediately got back in and pressed 31 again. This time, when the doors opened, I was back on my normal floor, blue carpet, beige walls, familiar apartment numbers. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe there was some kind of split floor design I didn't know about. Maybe I was just tired and imagined it. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next day, I decided to investigate. I waited until most people would be at work, then took the freight elevator again. I started pressing different floor buttons, and that's when things got truly bizarre. Every floor I visited via this elevator was different from what I knew existed in the building. The 25th floor had this heavy dark wood paneling and red carpeting that screamed 1970s. The 18th floor looked like it was straight out of the early 90s, with teal and pink accents. Each floor seemed to be frozen in time from different eras of the building's existence. I'm a software engineer by trade, so naturally I started mapping everything out. I created a spreadsheet tracking the differences between the normal floors and what I called the alternate floors accessed by the freight elevator. I even started taking pictures on my phone. After about a week of exploration, I had this theory. During renovations, instead of completely gutting and rebuilding each floor, the contractors had simply built new hallways and walls in front of the old ones, essentially creating hidden spaces between the original structure and the renovated areas. The regular elevators were programmed to stop at the new, renovated floors, while the freight elevator, which was probably never properly updated, still accessed the original floor layouts. This explained why some floors seemed older than others. They reflected different periods of renovation throughout the building's history. The building had essentially become this weird layered onion of different time periods. My curiosity soon turned to unease when I realized something disturbing. Some of these abandoned spaces showed signs of recent activity. On the alternate 25th floor, there was an apartment door slightly ajar. When I peeked inside, I saw what looked like a fully furnished apartment from maybe 10 years ago, but there were fresh food wrappers on the coffee table and a phone charger plugged into the wall. Someone was using these hidden spaces. I started noticing other things too. Some doors had fresh scratches around the locks. There were occasional footprints in the dust. And most unsettling, on the alternate 34th floor, I found a room that looked like some kind of command center. There was a desk with building blueprints spread out, showing both the regular floors and the alternate ones I'd been exploring. Pinned to the wall were detailed notes about residents' schedules, which apartments were currently empty, where security cameras were located, and their blind spots, and information about different types of door locks used throughout the building. There were photos of people, residents, entering and leaving their apartments, including me. My blood ran cold when I saw a photo of myself unlocking my door, taken just 3 days earlier. I backed out of that room and ran straight to the elevator, my heart pounding. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, then pushed my couch in front of it for good measure. I was officially freaking out. After calming down a bit, I decided I needed to report this to building management. The next morning, I went down to the office on the first floor with my phone full of photos as evidence. The building manager, this guy named Derek, who always seemed a bit off to me, listened to my story with an expression that shifted from annoyance to concern to something that looked weirdly like resignation. "Ms. Chen," he said finally, "I appreciate you bringing this to our attention." His reaction wasn't what I expected. He wasn't surprised or skeptical. He seemed almost like he'd been waiting for someone to discover this. He asked me not to share what I'd found with other residents to avoid unnecessary panic, and assured me they would handle the situation. That same day, I noticed maintenance workers placing out-of-order signs on the freight elevator. By evening, they had installed a keycard reader on it that restricted access. The next morning, I received an email from management offering residents on floors 20 through 35 the option to relocate to different units within the building or to other properties owned by the same company, citing planned maintenance work that would cause significant disruption. The email emphasized this was completely optional but highly recommended. About half the residents on my floor moved out within the week. I requested a transfer to a different building entirely, which they approved immediately with 0 penalties for breaking my lease. They even covered my moving expenses, which was unheard of. As I was moving out, I overheard one of the maintenance guys telling another that they were planning to fill the entire freight elevator shaft with concrete. That's when I realized whatever was happening in those hidden spaces was far more serious than I'd thought. I did some digging afterward and discovered that Meridian Towers had a history of disappearances, not many, just one every few years, but enough to form a pattern. People who vanished without taking their belongings, without any trace. The cases were always eventually closed as people who'd simply abandoned their lives and moved away. I've tried researching the building's history more deeply since then, but information seems to have been scrubbed from public records. The building's original architectural plans are mysteriously unavailable at the city archives due to water damage from a pipe burst in 2015. Sometimes I wonder if I should have done more, gone to the police, warned other residents. But honestly, I was too scared. The thought of someone watching me, photographing me, knowing my schedule, it was terrifying. I just wanted to get away. I drive past Meridian Towers occasionally. It looks the same from the outside, but I notice the freight elevator entrance in the back of the building has been bricked up. New tenants have moved in, probably unaware of what exists behind their walls. I still wake up sometimes thinking about those hidden floors, those abandoned spaces that weren't really abandoned, about who was using them and why, about what might still be happening in the spaces between walls that shouldn't exist. And most of all, I wonder if the building management knew all along, if they were covering it up, or worse, somehow involved. All I know for sure is that buildings have memories. They hold on to the past in ways we don't understand. And sometimes, if you take the wrong elevator, they'll show you things you were never meant to see. Story 17. I still can't believe I'm actually writing this down. My hands are shaking just thinking about it. I've tried telling a few people, but they either think I'm crazy or making it up for attention. I'm not. I wish I was. I'm a cultural anthropologist, or I was before everything changed. I specialized in New England folk traditions and community rituals at Boston University. That's how I first heard about Thornwood, Massachusetts. It started with an envelope that arrived at my office in late 2016. No return address, just my name typed on the front. Inside was a journal, brittle with age, and a short note. Dr. Weber, she wanted you to have this. Time is short. The journal belonged to Eleanor Hargrove, a lifelong resident of Thornwood. I'd never heard of her or the town before, but as I read through her entries, I became obsessed. Eleanor documented decades of life in Thornwood, a small community of about 1,800 people that seemed to exist in perfect harmony. But there was something else, references to what she called the dormancy, or the quiet time. Every year, for exactly 13 days between winter and spring, the entire town simply stopped. Roads closed, phone lines down, no internet, no visitors, nothing. I checked census data, economic reports, health statistics. Everything about Thornwood was abnormal. Cancer rates 78% lower than state average. Virtually no unemployment, no economic recession impacts. It was like the town existed in its own protective bubble. I applied for a research grant immediately and managed to secure a temporary position at Thornwood's Historical Society starting January 2017. My plan was simple: arrive, integrate, and stay through their mysterious shutdown period to document what was really happening. Thornwood looked like something from a postcard when I arrived. Classic New England architecture, a picturesque town square with a white gazebo, neatly maintained colonial homes. Everyone smiled and waved. It was almost too perfect, like one of those creepy model train villages. For the first few weeks, whenever I brought up the town's annual shutdown, people would change the subject or give vague answers about traditional maintenance periods and community reflection time. But I noticed how they'd glance at each other, these knowing looks passing between them. I befriended the town librarian, Sarah, who helped me access local records. She seemed more willing to talk than others. "It's just something we've always done," she told me one afternoon while helping me sort through town council minutes. Every town has its traditions, right? But 13 days of complete isolation is extreme, don't you think? I pressed. She went quiet for a moment. You should talk to Eleanor Hargrove. She knows more about our history than anyone. I finally met Eleanor in early February, a tiny woman, 93 years old, with bright eyes that didn't match her frail body. When I mentioned receiving her journal, she smiled. I knew you'd come, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They won't like it, but it's time someone knew. The agreement is failing. What agreement? I asked. With the benefactor, she replied, looking nervously toward her window. The covenant that keeps us safe, keeps us prosperous. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength. The dormancy begins on February 22nd. If you stay, you'll see everything, but they'll try to stop you. As the date approached, I noticed the town changing, supplies being stockpiled, windows being reinforced, and the residents, their friendly demeanor shifted to something tense, anxious. I started taking more detailed notes, recording everything I saw. February 21st, I accepted an invitation to dinner at Mayor Helen Richmond's house. A dozen or so community leaders were there, all watching me carefully. The mayor poured me a glass of wine. Marcus, she said warmly, we're so pleased you've taken such interest in our little town. Your research on our historical practices is quite thorough. I took a sip of wine. I'm particularly interested in the dormancy period. The room went silent. Yes, well, she continued, I hope you've made arrangements to leave tomorrow morning. The roads will be closing by noon. Actually, I've decided to stay. It's a unique opportunity to... Mayor Richmond interrupted. That won't be possible. The dormancy is for residents only. I remember feeling suddenly dizzy. The wine. The fucking wine. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. The last thing I remember was Mayor Richmond, leaning over me saying, I'm sorry, Dr. Weber, but some traditions can't be observed. They must be experienced. I woke up strapped to a bed in what looked like a basement room. Stone walls, no windows, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. My head was pounding, mouth dry. I struggled against the restraints until the door opened and Mayor Richmond walked in with Eleanor Hargrove in a wheelchair. I apologize for the dramatics, the mayor said, checking my restraints. But outsiders can't be conscious during the transition. It disrupts the symmetry. What the hell is going on? I demanded. Eleanor wheeled closer. I wanted you here, Marcus. We need someone to know, to remember, in case it goes wrong this time. The mayor glared at her. Nothing will go wrong. It never has. Tell him, Eleanor insisted. Mayor Richmond sighed. Dr. Weber, what you're about to experience is the cornerstone of Thornwood's existence. In 1788, our founders discovered something in the limestone caves beneath the town square. Something ancient. Something hungry. They made an arrangement. An arrangement, I repeated, still pulling at my restraints. A covenant, Eleanor clarified. Prosperity, health, protection, all in exchange for a tithe of dreams and one vessel of flesh. The mayor checked her watch. It's nearly midnight. The dormancy begins soon. The entire town will sleep, Dr. Weber. For 13 days, our collective consciousness will feed the benefactor. When we wake, another year of blessing begins. And the vessel of flesh? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Eleanor smiled sadly. The oldest willing resident. This year, that's me. I started shouting then, demanding they untie me, threatening to report them all. The mayor simply injected something into my arm. As darkness closed in, I heard her say, "When you wake, you'll understand. Everyone does. What followed felt like years compressed into 13 days. I experienced what I can only describe as a shared dreamscape. Thornwood, but wrong, distorted. The sky was too low, the colors too sharp. Every resident walked through this twisted version of their town, going about daily routines that made no sense. And from every manhole, every cellar floor, every crack in the pavement, these tendrils of darkness emerged. They didn't grab people. People approached them willingly, offering memories like bright, glowing orbs that the shadows consumed. I saw Eleanor in this dream Thornwood, walking with purpose toward the town square. Beneath the gazebo was a pit of absolute darkness. She turned to me, somehow knowing I was watching, and smiled before stepping into it. The darkness rippled as it enveloped her. I experienced this nightmare for what felt like an eternity. Sometimes I was myself, sometimes I was other residents, experiencing their memories, their fears, their surrender to the feeding. When I finally woke up, I was in a bed at Thornwood's small medical clinic. Mayor Richmond sat beside me. 13 days, she said, right on schedule. My body felt different. A persistent cough I'd had for months was gone. The arthritis in my knees that had bothered me since graduate school vanished. Even a melanoma I'd been scheduled to have removed the following month completely disappeared. What happened to Eleanor? I asked, though I already knew. Natural causes, the mayor replied softly, as it always is. I later found her obituary in the local paper. I also found town records going back to 1788. Each year's dormancy coincided with one death, the town's oldest resident. 230 citizens over 230 years. I left Thornwood immediately, driving straight to Boston with my notes, recordings, everything. I was going to expose them all. But something strange happened on the highway. I found myself growing inexplicably tired. I pulled over at a rest stop and fell asleep in my car. I dreamed of Thornwood again, of the darkness beneath the town square, of a presence so vast and ancient it made my mind bend trying to comprehend it. It showed me things, terrible, beautiful things, knowledge no human was meant to have. When I woke up, 13 days had passed. I was in a hospital. They said I'd been in an unexplained coma. My notes were gone, my recordings corrupted, and all I could think about was getting back to Thornwood. That was 3 years ago. I live here now, bought a house on Maple Street. I help coordinate what we publicly call our annual maintenance period. I've even helped prepare the special room beneath Town Hall for our oldest residents. The benefactor is patient. It is generous. It is hungry. Sometimes, late at night, I feel it reaching for me through my dreams, tendrils of darkness brushing against my consciousness. And I find myself counting the days until February 22nd, not with dread, but with anticipation. The covenant must be maintained. The dormancy must continue. The tithe must be paid. I've tried to leave 3 more times. I never make it past the county line before sleep takes me. I've tried to warn people, but the words won't come out right. They twist in my mouth until I'm praising Thornwood's traditions instead. It's getting worse. Last dormancy, I swear I saw something crawling up through the drains. Something physical. The benefactor is getting stronger, or maybe the barriers between our world and its domain are weakening. Eleanor was right. The agreement is failing, but not the way she thought. It's not that the benefactor might stop blessing us. It's that it might not stay beneath the town much longer. I'm writing this quickly. I don't know how long I have before the compulsion takes over again. If you're reading this, stay away from Thornwood, Massachusetts. Don't research us. Don't visit. Don't even think about us too hard. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can feel it noticing you too. Story 18. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me that night on Highway 200. It's been 3 months, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I guess I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. 6 months ago, I lost my brother Michael to cancer. He was only 32. We were always close growing up, and watching him fade away over those final months broke something in me. After the funeral and helping my parents sort through his things, I felt like I was suffocating in Seattle. Everything reminded me of him. That's when I decided to drive to Minneapolis to visit my college roommate. I could have flown, but I needed time alone with my thoughts. Michael and I had spent summers camping in Montana as teenagers. He loved the big sky country, so I planned my route through there as a sort of tribute to him. I was 2 days into my trip when it happened. The sun had set about an hour before, and I was on Highway 200 in Montana, one of those endless stretches of road where you can drive for an hour without seeing another car. It was just after 10 at night, and I was getting tired but wanted to push on to this town called Clearwater where I'd booked a room. The darkness out there is different from city darkness. It's absolute. Just my headlights cutting through pitch black, tall pines on either side, and occasional glimpses of stars when the trees opened up. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was starting to fade in and out with static. I remember checking my gas gauge and thinking I should have filled up at the last town. The needle was hovering just above a quarter tank, enough to get me to Clearwater, but it made me anxious. That's when I saw it, a flash of reflection in my headlights up ahead on the shoulder. As I got closer, I could make out a figure waving arms. My first instinct was caution. A lone woman on a dark highway shouldn't stop for strangers, but something made me slow down. Maybe it was the fact that I was a woman alone too, and I'd want someone to help me if I were stranded. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead and watched in my rearview mirror as the figure approached. It was a woman, maybe in her 50s, wearing jeans and a blue windbreaker. She had short brown hair with some gray streaks, nothing threatening about her. I rolled my window down halfway. "Thank goodness," she said, breathless from jogging to my car. "I've been out here for almost an hour. My car just died completely." I glanced back but couldn't see a vehicle. "Where's your car?" "About a quarter-mile back, pulled off onto a dirt access road." She had this weary smile. I started walking, hoping to catch a ride to the next town. I checked my phone. No service, of course. "Do you have a cell phone?" She shook her head. "Left it charging in the car. Dead now, like everything else." Something about her seemed so normal, like someone's mom who coached soccer and baked cookies. I made a decision and unlocked the passenger door. "I'm heading to Clearwater. I can drop you there." "That would be wonderful. Thank you so much." Her relief seemed genuine. "I'm Barbara, by the way." "Sarah," I replied, putting the car in drive. The first few minutes were awkward silence. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the steering wheel. Barbara sat with her purse in her lap, looking out the windshield. "Not many people on this road at night," she finally said. "Yeah, it's pretty isolated. Beautiful during the day, though. My brother and I used to camp around here when we were kids." Barbara turned slightly toward me. "You're not from Montana, then?" "No, Seattle. Just passing through on my way to Minneapolis." "That's quite a drive to make alone." I nodded, feeling that familiar tightness in my throat whenever I thought about why I was really making this trip. I needed the time to think. She seemed to understand something without me saying it. Sometimes driving is the best therapy. We fell into conversation easier than I expected. There was something comforting about talking to a stranger in the dark, like confessing in a church when you can't see the priest's face. I found myself telling her about Michael, how he'd been diagnosed 18 months ago, how quickly he declined at the end. He loved Montana, I said, wiping away a tear with the back of my hand. We spent 3 summers hiking around Glacier National Park with our parents. He always said he felt most alive out here under the big sky. Barbara was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about your brother. Losing family is the hardest thing. She said it with such conviction that I glanced over. Her face was half illuminated by the dashboard lights, and there was something in her expression, a depth of understanding that told me she knew grief intimately. This highway has its share of sadness, she continued, looking out at the road ahead. Did you know there was a terrible accident on this stretch about 30 years ago? I shook my head. A family of 4 collided with a logging truck that had jackknifed across the road. It was a foggy night, and they didn't see it until it was too late. Her voice had taken on a distant quality. The father and both children died at the scene. Only the mother survived. That's awful, I said, feeling a chill despite the car's heater. Yes, the mother was in the hospital for weeks. By the time she recovered physically, she had lost everything. Barbara turned to look out her window. I think about that family whenever I drive this road. We were quiet for a while after that. The heater hummed, and the tires made that hypnotic sound against the pavement. My headlights caught the occasional reflective eyes of animals in the brush beside the road. Clearwater should be coming up in about 15 minutes, I said, breaking the silence. Barbara nodded. There's a place called the Lakeside Inn just as you enter town. It's clean and reasonable. Room 7 is particularly nice. It has a view of the mountains at sunrise. That's actually where I have a reservation, I said, surprised. How did you know? She smiled. Lucky guess. It's the best place to stay in Clearwater. We drove the rest of the way talking about lighter things. She asked about my job, graphic designer, and I learned she used to be a nurse. It felt good to talk to someone who was a complete stranger. No history, no expectations, just human connection in the darkness. The lights of Clearwater eventually appeared ahead. It was a small town, just a main street with a few businesses, most dark at this hour. The Lakeside Inn was exactly as the name suggested, a single-story motel facing a small lake, with maybe 20 rooms in total. I pulled into the parking lot. Do you need a ride somewhere specific, or are you staying here too? Barbara gathered her purse. I have someone coming to get me. Thank you so much for the ride, Sarah. It meant more than you know. Are you sure? It's pretty late. I'm sure. My ride will be here soon. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her touch was cool but comforting. Take care of yourself. Grief has its own timeline. Don't rush it. With that, she got out and closed the door. I watched her walk toward the office, her blue windbreaker visible in my headlights, until she stepped onto the sidewalk and out of the light. I sat there for a minute, feeling strangely emotional. Then I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat and headed to check in. The night clerk was a sleepy-looking guy in his 20s. He perked up when I walked in. Checking in? Yes, reservation for Sarah Chen, he typed on his computer. Found you. Just you tonight? Yes, just me. I paused. And maybe my friend who just came in? Barbara? She was checking if someone could pick her up. The clerk looked confused. No one's come in before you, ma'am. You're our first check-in since 8 o'clock. I turned and looked back at the parking lot through the glass door. There was no sign of Barbara. Oh, she must have gone around to use the phone or something, I said, feeling suddenly uneasy. He handed me a key card. "You're in room 7, best view in the place." Room 7, just like Barbara had said. I thanked him and went to my room, glancing around the parking lot as I walked. No sign of Barbara or anyone else. The lot was empty except for my car and what I assumed was the clerk's old pickup truck. The room was basic but clean. 2 queen beds, a small table with chairs, a TV on a dresser. I set my bag down and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. It was too dark to see any view, just my own reflection staring back. I was exhausted from driving, but still wound up from the strange encounter. After a quick shower, I climbed into bed and fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of Michael. We were hiking in Montana, and he kept walking ahead of me on the trail, turning back to smile but never waiting. I called his name, but he just waved and continued forward. The trail got steeper, and fog started rolling in. I lost sight of him. Then suddenly, there were headlights cutting through the fog, and the sound of screeching brakes and metal crushing metal. I woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The room felt cold, despite the blankets. Unable to fall back asleep, I grabbed my phone. I had 1 bar of service, enough to open a browser. Without really thinking about why, I searched Highway 200 Montana accident family logging truck. Several results came up. I clicked on the first one, an article from the Helena Independent Record dated June 17, 1993, exactly 30 years ago to the day. The headline read, "3 dead in Highway 200 tragedy." My blood went cold as I read, "A family of 4 collided with a jackknifed logging truck on Highway 200 late Wednesday night, killing 3 and leaving 1 in critical condition. Robert Chen, 42, and children, Michael Chen, 8, and Lisa Chen, 6, were pronounced dead at the scene. Barbara Chen, 39, was airlifted to St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula, where she remains in critical condition. Chen, the same last name as mine. A boy named Michael, a mother named Barbara." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This had to be a coincidence. Chen is a common Chinese surname. But the details, the logging truck, the mother named Barbara who survived, the boy named Michael, it was too specific. I kept reading, scanning through old articles. Barbara Chen had recovered physically, but suffered from severe depression after losing her family. The last mention of her was from 2008, noting that she had become an advocate for highway safety in Montana. Then I searched for the Lakeside Inn in Clearwater, Montana. The first result was a TripAdvisor page with a notice at the top. "This property has been closed since 2018. I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. The motel had been closed for 5 years, but I was sitting in it right now. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, feel the sheets under my hands. I got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. Instead of a parking lot, I saw an overgrown field. The asphalt was cracked with weeds growing through. My car was still there, but it sat alone in what was clearly an abandoned lot. Panic rose in my throat. I grabbed my key card and ran to the door, yanking it open. The outside walkway was weathered, paint peeling. The office where I'd checked in had broken windows, and a faded "for sale" sign hung crookedly on the door. I ran back into the room and grabbed my things, threw on shoes, and bolted for my car. The key fob unlocked it, and I practically dived inside, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As the engine started, I looked back at room 7. The door I'd just run through was hanging off its hinges, the room behind it dark and empty. I peeled out of the lot and back onto Highway 200, heading east because it was the direction I'd been going. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? Was I still dreaming? The highway stretched empty before me. I turned the radio on loud and opened the windows, cold air blasting my face to ensure I was awake. This was real. This was happening. About 5 miles down the road, my headlights caught something on the shoulder. A small memorial cross with plastic flowers. I don't know why, but I pulled over. Using my phone's flashlight, I approached the memorial. 3 names were written on the cross: Robert Chen, Michael Chen, Lisa Chen, June 17, 1993. When I got back to my car, shaking and crying, I noticed something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A blue windbreaker. Barbara's windbreaker. I drove straight through until morning, not stopping until I reached a crowded truck stop 200 miles away. I never finished my trip to Minneapolis. I turned around and drove straight back to Seattle, taking a different route. I've researched Barbara Chen extensively since then. She died in 2015 at age 61. There's a small foundation in Montana that gives scholarships in memory of her family. Every June 17th, they place flowers at that roadside memorial. I don't know if I gave a ride to a ghost that night, or if I somehow stepped through time, or if I just had some kind of breakdown from grief. All I know is that on the anniversary of the worst day of her life, Barbara Chen somehow found me, another Chen, grieving another Michael, and guided me safely through the darkness. I make a donation to her foundation every month now, and I never drive at night anymore.